A pot of beans and a handful of cornmeal kept more families together than any government program ever did. Your grandparents did not have meal plans or grocery delivery. They had a pantry with whatever was left, and they turned it into dinner every single night. Some of these meals were built around a can of tomatoes and a cheap cut of meat. Others came together with nothing but flour, water, and bacon grease. You will hear about a casserole that stretched 1 pound of hamburger into enough food for 8 people. You will find a soup that simmered all day on almost no fuel and fed the whole block. And somewhere around number 40, a dish so plain it barely had a name, but it got families through winters that would have broken them otherwise. Here are 100 forgotten dinners your grandparents ate to survive. Number 25, beef stroganoff, not the fancy version from a restaurant menu. The 1950s version. You sliced cheap round steak into thin strips and browned them fast in a hot skillet with butter and sliced onions. Then you stirred in a can of cream of mushroom soup, a splash of Worcestershire, and a dollop of sour cream. The whole thing simmered for 15 minutes while you boiled egg noodles on the back burner. You poured the stroganoff over the noodles and set it on the table, and it looked like something from a magazine. Betty Crocker put this recipe in her cookbook, and suddenly every housewife in the Midwest was making it on Tuesday nights. The sour cream made it taste rich, the mushroom soup made it easy, and the cheap cut of beef made it possible on a budget that had no room for tenderloin. Number 25. Fried bologna sandwiches, thick-cut bologna from the deli counter, scored along the edges so it would not curl, dropped into a hot skillet with a pat of margarine, and fried until both sides turned brown and crispy around the slits. White bread, a smear of yellow mustard, maybe a slice of American cheese if it happened to be payday week. In the 1960s, a package of Oscar Mayer bologna ran about 40 cents, and it fed a family of 5 for 2 straight nights. Kids in mill towns from Pittsburgh to Birmingham grew up eating this 3 times a week and asking for more. It was never a last resort. It was the meal you actually wanted when you got home from school and the kitchen smelled like hot grease and bread. Number 24. Milk toast. This was the dinner you made when somebody was running a fever, or when the cupboard was almost bare, or when you simply did not have the energy to do anything else. 2 slices of bread, toasted just enough to hold their shape, laid flat in a shallow bowl. You heated milk on the stove with a pat of butter and a pinch of sugar, poured it warm over the toast, and ate it slowly with a spoon. In the 1940s and 1950s, milk toast was what mothers made for sick children and what widowed men ate alone at the kitchen table on quiet evenings. It cost almost nothing. It required almost nothing. And it was warm, and it was soft, and at the end of a long day, that was enough. Before I go further, for the folks who want meals like these all gathered in one place, I have put together the Vintage Recipe Guide, a collection of the recipes we keep coming back to on this channel, all at my website vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 24. Milk toast. This was the dinner you made when somebody was running a fever, or when the cupboard was almost bare, or when you simply did not have the energy to do anything else. 2 slices of bread, toasted just enough to hold their shape, laid flat in a shallow bowl. You heated milk on the stove with a pat of butter and a pinch of sugar, poured it warm over the toast, and ate it slowly with a spoon. In the 1940s and 1950s, milk toast was what mothers made for sick children and what widowed men ate alone at the kitchen table on quiet evenings. It cost almost nothing. It required almost nothing. And it was warm, and it was soft, and at the end of a long day, that was enough. Before I go further, for the folks who want meals like these all gathered in one place, I have put together the Vintage Recipe Guide, a collection of the recipes we keep coming back to on this channel, all at my website vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 30. Hoe cake with red-eye gravy. A piece of country ham about the size of a small saucer goes into a hot iron pan. 2 minutes aside is plenty, and the brown bits stuck to the iron are the whole point of the supper. A splash of black coffee deglazes the pan, and that thin red gravy is what gave the dish its name. The hoe cake is just yellow cornmeal, salt, and boiling water patted into a flat round and fried in the leftover ham grease until the edges turn the color of a copper penny. One ham slice, one hoe cake, one plate. That was supper in Madison County, North Carolina, on a Tuesday in November, and the woman eating it did not feel poor. She felt fed. The dish has lived in the mountain repertoire since the early 1800s, and a single portion costs about $1.50 at any country butcher. Number 25, Hoover stew. You learned this one in a soup line in 1932 because they were the only kitchens still cooking. A pot of macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, a can of corn, and whatever hot dogs the butcher could not sell that week. They named it after the president who took the blame, and Hooverville families ate it 3 nights a week for a decade. And the trick was the order. You cooked the macaroni first, drained most of the liquid, then dropped the tomatoes and corn into the same pot so the pasta starch thickened the broth without flour. 1 pot, 1 burner, 20 minutes total. The whole pan cost 20 cents in 1933 and fed 5. But a single mother in a Hooverville tent could put a hot supper on a folding table with 2 cans, 1 box of macaroni, and a stove that ran on scrap wood. Your grandmother called it supper. She was not ashamed. Number 24, Depression spaghetti. You opened a bottle of ketchup and you opened a box of pasta, and that was the entire grocery list. The home cooks of the 1930s figured out that sugar, vinegar, and tomato puree were the 3 things that made marinara taste like marinara, and ketchup already had all 3. You boiled the noodles, drained them, stirred in half a bottle of ketchup, and you had a plate that looked like Italian food on a budget that did not. A Japanese chef in 1945 watched American GIs eat C-ration spaghetti and invented Napolitan, still on Tokyo menus today. Down in Haiti, they make breakfast spaghetti with ketchup, sausage, and pepper. One cheap idea, 3 countries, all feeding workers. The bare-bones version fed millions across 2 decades. Number 24, skillet Spanish rice. In 1949, General Foods launched Minute Rice on national television, and overnight rice became a weeknight staple. Before that, rice took 45 minutes on the stove. Minute Rice took 5. The man who invented it was an Afghan-American engineer named Ataullah Ozai Durrani, who sold the process to General Foods in 1941. The Army used it first, then the suburbs did. Skillet Spanish rice was 4 strips of bacon fried in a pan, the onion and green pepper cooked in the drippings, a can of diced tomatoes, a cup of minute rice, and a shake of chili powder. You covered it and waited 5 minutes. The whole thing cost under 60 cents. It was the first time most American housewives cooked rice on a regular weeknight without thinking twice about it. Before minute rice, rice was a Sunday ingredient. After minute rice, it was a Tuesday one. That shift changed the shape of the American dinner plate. Swiss steak had nothing to do with Switzerland. The name came from the tenderizing technique, Swissing borrowed from the textile process for flattening fabric, where you hammered a round steak with a mallet until the muscle fibers relented, dredged in flour, browned hard in a Dutch oven, then buried under canned tomatoes, sliced onion, bell peppers, and Worcestershire. Lid on at 325. 2.5 hours undisturbed. What came out was pull-apart, tender inside dark tomato gravy so thick it clung to a fork. Reynolds Wrap promoted the recipe on the back of their foil boxes starting in the late 1940s, a specific marketing push that spread it into millions of kitchens that might never have found it. And Swiss steak held a place on American tables for 3 more decades before the convenience food era quietly made slow braising seem like too much to ask on a weeknight. Recipes first appeared in American cookbooks around 1911. For 60 years, nobody needed to explain what it was or why the waiting was worth it. That explanation is now required. Swiss steak was on the table before the word braising entered anyone's vocabulary. She took a cheap round steak, the cut nobody else wanted, laid it on the counter, and drove a meat mallet into it until the flour disappeared into the surface. Then it went into a heavy pan, browned on both sides, and buried under canned tomatoes and sliced onions. The lid went on. The oven went low. 2 hours later, that kitchen smelled like something that cost far more than it did. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. Swissing was the tenderizing technique, the process of pounding a cheap cut into submission. Reynolds Wrap Aluminum spread the recipe in the late 1940s by suggesting home cooks line the pan with foil for easy cleanup, and suddenly it was in better homes and gardens, community cookbooks, church bulletins. Round steak was 50 cents a pound. The gravy it made, thick and rust red, rich with rendered fat, was worth 10 times that on a winter Tuesday. You can find the recipe anywhere. You cannot find the hands that made it taste like that. The jar of bacon grease beside the stove was the most important ingredient in the kitchen, and nobody who grew up in these houses ever threw it away. Fried potatoes and onions cooked in saved bacon grease was a meal that appeared on tables across the Appalachian South 3 or 4 nights a week. Potatoes sliced thin, a rough chopped onion, and a heavy spoonful of drippings from that jar, all pressed flat in a cast iron skillet and cooked without stirring until the bottom turned golden and crisp. You flipped it in sections, not all at once, and the onions went sweet and dark against the edges of the potatoes. In the 1950s, a 10-pound bag of potatoes cost around 35 cents, and a single bag could stretch across a full week of suppers. The grease was free, saved from breakfast, from Sunday's fatback, from every strip of bacon that ever touched that pan. Nobody measured. You scooped until the skillet looked right. That instinct died with the women who owned those jars. Cornmeal mush with drippings was the ultimate proof that Appalachian cooks could turn yesterday's leftovers into today's comfort. First, you stirred cornmeal into salted water until it thickened into a firm porridge, poured it into pans, and let it cool overnight. The next morning, those firm slabs were sliced and fried in hot bacon grease until the edges crisped brown and the centers stayed creamy and soft. The smell alone was enough to pull folks from their beds, as rich and tempting as any feast. Poured over with white gravy or syrup, it became a breakfast fit for a hard day's work. Families who had little knew how to stretch every grain, every drop of grease, and every bit of effort. The crackle from the skillet told them they had done it right. Cornmeal mush with drippings was more than a meal. It was a quiet triumph. It fed the body and reminded the heart that nothing had gone to waste. Each bite tasted like patience, creativity, and pride, the kind only born from making do. What began as simple porridge became a golden slice of home that fed generations through thick and thin. Milk toast was the quiet companion of countless evenings spent alone, a dish so simple it seemed too humble to call dinner. Yet for seniors watching every penny during the 1950s and 60s, this warm bowl delivered exactly what tired bodies needed. Stale bread was never wasted in those kitchens where thrift meant survival. Slices were toasted lightly, placed in a shallow bowl, and covered with warm milk heated with butter and a pinch of salt. The bread softened into something between solid and liquid, easy to eat for those with dental troubles or diminished appetites. Some added sugar or cinnamon when sweetness was needed. The cost was negligible since milk and bread were pantry constants, and preparation took barely 5 minutes. Milk toast carried memories of childhood sickbeds and mothers tending fevered children. For seniors eating alone, this bowl meant warmth without fuss and nourishment without pretense. Smothered rabbit with onions transformed wild game into Sunday-worthy eating through patience and a heavy cast-iron lid. Hunters returned with cottontails cleaned and jointed, ready to be dredged in seasoned flour and browned in bacon drippings until golden. The brown pieces were removed, while thick sliced onions went into the same fat, cooking down soft and sweet. The rabbit returned to nestle among onions, everything covered with just enough water to create steam, and the heavy lid went on. The skillet simmered for hours, tough meat slowly surrendering to tenderness while onions melted into silky gravy. Families valued this because wild rabbit cost nothing but the hunt, and long cooking required little attention while chores got done. The finished rabbit fell off the bone into gravy, carrying the richness of bacon fat and natural sweetness of slow-cooked onions. One skillet fed a family of 6 with nothing left but clean bones and full stomachs. Hamburger hash was the weeknight miracle that turned a quarter pound of ground beef into a complete dinner for pennies. During the lean decades of the mid-20th century, seniors living alone discovered that browning ground beef with diced potatoes and onions created something far greater than the sum of its parts. The meat released its fat into the skillet, crisping the potatoes while the onions caramelized into sweet strands that wove through every bite. A splash of Worcestershire sauce and black pepper transformed the humble mixture into something deeply savory. The beauty of hamburger hash was its forgiving nature. It accepted leftover peas, corn, or green beans without complaint, stretching the meal further. One skillet fed one person for 2 meals, making it economical for those watching every dime. The crispy bottom that formed against the cast iron became the most coveted part, scraped up and savored last. This wasn't fancy cooking, but it was honest food that kept countless seniors fed and satisfied. Roast goose was the traditional Christmas bird before turkey claimed the holiday throne, its rich, dark meat and crispy skin gracing tables for centuries. Families who kept geese would select their Christmas bird months in advance, fattening it until it reached proper size. The preparation began the night before, with the bird hung to dry so the skin would crisp properly during roasting. Goose fat rendered during cooking was saved religiously, liquid gold for roasting potatoes throughout the winter. The meat was darker and richer than turkey, with a flavor that demanded respect and proper accompaniments like red cabbage and applesauce. Carving goose required different skills than turkey, the anatomy being distinct. By the 1980s, goose had largely disappeared from American Christmas tables, replaced by the blander but more forgiving turkey. Those who remember goose Christmases speak of them with reverence, mourning a tradition that connected them to centuries of holiday feasting. Number 24. Liver and onions. You either loved this meal or you sat at the table until bedtime staring at it. Calves' liver sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in bacon drippings until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed pink. The onions went in first, cooked low and slow until they turned golden and sweet, then piled on top of the liver like a blanket. Mothers served this once a week because liver was cheap and the doctor said it was good for your blood. Children pushed it around the plate. Fathers ate it without complaint. And grandmothers made it better than anyone because they knew the secret was not overcooking it. The moment liver went gray and tough, the meal was ruined. A good cook pulled it from the skillet while it still had give. Served with mashed potatoes and a glass of milk, this was a dinner that tasted like iron and obligation, and something close to love. Before we continue, for those of you who want these kinds of old recipes all collected in one place, I put together something called the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. That is the last you will hear of it. If it sounds like something you would use, it is right there. Now back to the list. Number 22. American goulash. This had nothing to do with the Hungarian original. American goulash was a pound of ground beef browned in a Dutch oven, tossed with elbow macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a heavy pour of store-brand tomato sauce. Salt, pepper, maybe a shake of garlic powder if you were feeling bold. The whole pot fed 6 people for about $1.20, and it reheated the next day even better than it tasted fresh. In factory towns across Ohio and Michigan, goulash was Wednesday night. Not because anyone planned it that way. By Wednesday, you were tired, and the box of macaroni was always sitting in the cupboard. Mothers stirred it with one hand while holding a toddler on the opposite hip, and the pot was scraped clean by Thursday lunch. Number 23. Salmon patties. A can of pink salmon, drained and picked clean of bones and skin, mixed with crushed saltine crackers, 1 beaten egg, and a little diced onion. You shaped them into flat rounds and fried them in Crisco or vegetable oil until they turned golden on both sides. Families across the South and the Midwest made these every Friday, partly because they were affordable and partly because a lot of Catholic households still avoided meat at the end of the week. Serve them alongside canned green beans and instant mashed potatoes, and you had a plate that looked like it took an hour. It took about 12 minutes from start to table, and I have never met a single person who grew up in the 1960s and does not remember the smell of salmon patties frying on a Friday afternoon. Number 28. Fried apples and a single pork chop. 1 thin bone-in chop, 2 firm tart apples cored and sliced into half moons, a spoon of bacon grease, and a pinch of dark brown sugar. The chop fries first in the heavy pan, comes out to rest on the plate, and the apples go into the same pan with the drippings still warm. 8 minutes. They soften, brown at the edges, and turn the color of an October hillside. The chop goes back beside them. A serving for one fits on a saucer. Joseph Dabney documented this exact pairing in his book on Appalachian foodways, and Ronnie Lundy called it the most honest pork dish in the mountains. The apples were usually limber twigs or wine saps from the back orchard, varieties most grocery stores stopped carrying after the 1970s. It tastes like a cool morning on a wood porch. Number 23. Tomato soup cake. You measured a can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup straight into the mixing bowl, and you got a spice cake out of the oven that nobody could place. The recipe showed up in community cookbooks around 1928, when eggs and milk were too expensive, and the soup did the work of dairy. The cake came out moist and dense, with a cinnamon and clove crumb that tasted like a campfire spice cake. Campbell's started printing the recipe on the soup label in 1960. Your great-aunt frosted it with cream cheese, served it on a Sunday plate, and let your uncle ask 3 times what kind of cake it was. She never told. The tomato acid activated the baking soda and gave the cake a tight crumb you cannot get with milk. The genius was always the sleight of hand. Nobody at the table knew they were eating a soup can. Number 25. Welsh rarebit. A melted cheese sauce poured over thick toast. That was the whole meal. In the 1890s, it was a fashionable dish served in silver chafing dishes at society parties. By the 1950s, it had moved from the parlor to the kitchen. Betty Crocker put it in her picture cookbook in 1950. The American version used Velveeta or processed cheddar, a can of Campbell's tomato soup, a splash of milk, and a pinch of dry mustard. You melted it all together in one saucepan over low heat. 15 minutes. The entire dish cost about 50 cents and fed 4 people. Your mother probably called it cheese toast. Your grandmother probably called it supper. It sat at a strange crossroads in the 1950s, a dish with a foreign name that any woman in America could make from 2 ingredients she already had in the cupboard. The applesauce was never from a jar. Rough-cut apples with a cinnamon stick simmering on the back burner, while the bone-in pork chops rendered their fat in cast iron. The rim of each chop pressed flat against the heat until it crisped gold. Salt and pepper only, because the apple was the flavor being built toward. Plated together, the chunky warm sauce, never pured, left rough so you knew it was real, cut through the pork fat in a way nothing bottled ever replicated. The pairing of pork and apple is at least 5,000 years old, and in the 1970s, it was still done from scratch on a Tuesday without ceremony. The bone-in chop has mostly given way to the boneless loin now, quicker and carrying less of what made the original worth eating, and the applesauce comes sealed under foil in 4-packs. She never explained why the scratch version tasted different. She didn't think she needed to. You understood at the table, the way children understand things, not through words, but through being present when something is done right. Stuffed bell peppers looked like they required planning. Company food dressed up as everyday food. Peppers hollowed out with a spoon, filled with ground beef, rice, and canned tomatoes, then set in a baking dish and slid into a moderate oven until the tops browned and the peppers softened. The dish made sense in the post-war years because it used everything efficiently. Beef stretched further with rice, the pepper was the container, the tomato sauce baked in. Families who moved to the suburbs in the 1950s found it on the back of the Hunt's tomato sauce can, in church recipe swaps, in the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook. What varied from kitchen to kitchen was the seasoning: Worcestershire in one house, garlic powder and dried oregano in another, plain salt and pepper in the next. You knew a good one by the smell through the oven door, beef and tomato going caramel at the edges, the pepper releasing its sweetness into the sauce below. The smell told you. You didn't need the clock. There was a time when the last meal of the day cost nothing but a fistful of cold cornbread and whatever buttermilk was left in the jar. Cornbread crumbled into buttermilk, eaten from a glass with a long spoon, was supper for families across Appalachia, the Ozarks, and the rural Deep South from the Depression years straight through the 1970s. The cornbread had to be cold, at least a few hours old, firm enough to hold its shape when the buttermilk hit it. You crumbled it by hand, poured the buttermilk over, and ate it standing at the counter or sitting on the porch in the dark. A full glass cost less than 3 cents in the 1940s. It required no stove, no heat, no preparation beyond the breaking of bread. The people who ate this every night did not call it a recipe. They called it Tuesday. Pickled pig's feet were Christmas delicacy, transforming butchering scraps into something prized. When families butchered hogs in December, nothing was wasted, especially feet becoming treats after preparation. The feet were cleaned meticulously, boiled tender with bay leaves and peppercorns, then packed into stone crocks and covered with spiced vinegar heated with garlic and pepper. They cured for weeks, vinegar penetrating meat and softening cartilage until everything became tender and tangy. Served cold on Christmas morning, pickled feet were eaten with fingers, meat falling off bones while gelatinous texture melted on tongues. In rural communities throughout the South, these represented thrift elevated to tradition, using every part of hog and creating something delicious. Children learned to appreciate pickled feet as treats, not scraps. The vinegary tang cut through rich holiday meals. This proved mountain cooking was about transforming everything into something worth celebrating. Sardines on crackers represented pantry cooking at its most practical, requiring nothing more than opening a tin and arranging contents on whatever crackers were at hand. For seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s, this combination offered complete protein and essential oils without any cooking whatsoever. The tiny fish came packed in oil, water, or mustard sauce depending on preference, and a single tin stretched across 2 meals when appetite was small. Saltine crackers were the traditional base, their neutral flavor providing contrast to the rich, briny fish. Some seniors added lemon juice or hot sauce to brighten flavors. Others mashed the sardines with a fork, creating a spread that distributed more evenly. The entire meal cost pennies and provided nutrients doctors recommended for aging bodies. Sardines on crackers were consumed at kitchen tables by people who understood that dignity in dining came from adequacy, not extravagance. Skillet ham and red-eye gravy was the kind of breakfast for dinner that kept farming families going through long winter evenings. Country ham, salt-cured and hung in smokehouses for months, was sliced thick and fried in cast iron until the fat rendered and edges turned crispy and caramelized. The magic happened after the ham was set aside. Black coffee was poured directly into the hot skillet, sizzling against the rendered fat and browned bits clinging to the iron. This created red-eye gravy, named for the reddish eye that formed when coffee and fat separated. The gravy was thin, intensely salty, and slightly bitter, meant to be soaked up with biscuits or spooned over grits. For families who raised their own hogs and cured their own meat, this dish cost almost nothing beyond the coffee. The entire meal came together in under 15 minutes, leaving nothing but satisfaction and a well-seasoned skillet behind. Salmon patty skillet was a thrifty creation that turned an inexpensive can of pink salmon into golden, crispy cakes that satisfied like nothing else. Seniors on fixed incomes knew that canned salmon provided protein, calcium from the soft bones, and nutrients that doctors would later praise as essential. The salmon was drained, flaked, and mixed with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, and minced onion before being shaped into patties and fried until the exterior turned deeply golden. The inside stayed moist and tender, with a flavor both familiar and comforting. These patties were often served right in the skillet alongside fried potatoes or with a simple white sauce poured over top. A single can yielded 3 or 4 patties, enough for 2 dinners with careful portioning. The recipe required no special ingredients and came together in minutes, making it ideal for evenings when energy was low. Salmon patties represented the ingenuity of making something genuinely delicious from pantry staples. Beef Wellington was the ultimate expression of holiday extravagance, wrapping prime beef tenderloin in mushroom duxelles and flaky puff pastry. The preparation took hours, Searing the beef, cooking down finely chopped mushrooms until they were practically dry, wrapping everything in pastry and chilling until firm. Timing the bake was crucial. The pastry needed to turn golden while the beef inside stayed perfectly pink. Slicing revealed beautiful cross-sections of meat encased in mushroom and pastry that made guests audibly gasp. This was company food, reserved for Christmas Eve dinners when important guests were coming or when families wanted to prove their sophistication. The dish required expensive ingredients and considerable skill, making it a status symbol as much as a meal. Beef Wellington represented the aspirational cooking of the era, when home cooks attempted restaurant-quality dishes to impress. It has largely vanished from home kitchens, relegated to expensive steakhouses where few experience its former glory. Number 22. American chop suey, elbow macaroni, ground beef, canned tomatoes, and a diced green pepper. That was the whole thing. You browned the beef, added the vegetables, stirred in the cooked noodles, and served it in bowls like pasta with ambition. In New England, they called it American chop suey. In the Midwest, it went by goulash. Down south, it barely had a name at all. The dish had nothing to do with Chinese cooking. The name stuck because anything tossed together fast with whatever you had counted as chop suey in the American imagination of the time. It tasted better the next day, reheated in a skillet with a little extra tomato stirred through. Most families made it once a week and never wrote down the recipe. Number 21. Cream chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable, and the veterans who came home from the Second World War and Korea kept making it anyway. You tore dried beef into thin strips, fried it in butter, stirred in enough flour to make a paste, and then added milk slowly until the whole thing thickened into a white gravy. Pour it over a piece of toast, and you had a meal that stuck with you all day long. The Armour brand sold jars of chipped beef for less than a can of tuna, and one jar made enough gravy for 4 plates. It looked like something from a hospital cafeteria in 1952, but the flavor was salty and rich and deeply savory, and men who learned to eat it in the barracks kept serving it to their own children for 20 years after the uniform came off. Nobody called it meal planning. Nobody called it food insecurity. In the 1950s and 1960s, the kitchen was just the room where you solved the problem of keeping everyone fed, and you solved it with whatever you had. A bag of dried beans, half a head of cabbage, a ham bone the butcher was about to toss. The women who ran these kitchens did not follow recipes. They followed instinct and arithmetic. How many mouths? How many days until payday? How much flour is left in the canister? And the meals they built in that narrow space between nothing and just enough became the real foundation of American home cooking. Not the magazine version with garnished plates and copper pots. The version where dinner cost 40 cents, the table was set by 6, and nobody in the house went to bed hungry. Number 21. Cream chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable, and the veterans who came home from the Second World War and Korea kept making it anyway. You tore dried beef into thin strips, fried it in butter, stirred in enough flour to make a paste, and then added milk slowly until the whole thing thickened into a white gravy. Pour it over a piece of toast, and you had a meal that stuck with you all day long. The Armour brand sold jars of chipped beef for less than a can of tuna, and one jar made enough gravy for 4 plates. It looked like something from a hospital cafeteria in 1952, but the flavor was salty and rich and deeply savory, and men who learned to eat it in the barracks kept serving it to their own children for 20 years after the uniform came off. Nobody called it meal planning. Nobody called it food insecurity. In the 1950s and 1960s, the kitchen was just the room where you solved the problem of keeping everyone fed, and you solved it with whatever you had. A bag of dried beans, half a head of cabbage, a ham bone the butcher was about to toss. The women who ran these kitchens did not follow recipes. They followed instinct and arithmetic. How many mouths? How many days until payday? How much flour is left in the canister? And the meals they built in that narrow space between nothing and just enough became the real foundation of American home cooking. Not the magazine version with garnished plates and copper pots. The version where dinner cost 40 cents, the table was set by 6, and nobody in the house went to bed hungry. Number 29. Cornbread crumbled in a glass of buttermilk. A wedge of yesterday's skillet cornbread broken into a tall glass, cold buttermilk poured over the top, and a spoon. That is the whole meal. In the hill country of East Tennessee, a working farm widow named it her summer supper because the stove never had to come back on. The sour bite of the buttermilk and the sweet crumb of the bread made a balance that has no equivalent in any modern grocery store. The dish kept Appalachian families fed through August heat for 2 centuries. Ronnie Lundy gave it its own page in her cookbook on the foods of the Southern Mountains. It is dignified, fast, and costs less than a quarter when buttermilk is on sale. Number 22. Mock apple pie from Ritz crackers. You broke up 36 Ritz crackers into a pie shell, poured a sugar syrup of water, sugar, lemon juice, and cream of tartar over the top, dusted it with cinnamon, and baked it for 30 minutes. What came out tasted enough like apple pie that grown men asked for seconds. Ritz hit shelves on November 21, 1934, at 19 cents a pound, and within 3 years they were the best-selling cracker in the world. Apples were expensive, crackers were cheap. The cream of tartar mimicked apple's tart bite, and the lemon did the rest. By the Second World War, Nabisco was printing the recipe on every blue cracker box. Your grandmother served it at church suppers. Nobody guessed, but you could only pull it off if you served it warm. Cold mock apple pie tasted like a soggy cracker, and that was the rule every Depression-era hostess passed down without writing it on the recipe card. Number 23. Franks and beans. In Rhode Island and Massachusetts, Saturday night meant one thing: hot dogs sliced into baked beans in a cast-iron skillet. The tradition went back generations in New England. By the 1950s, it was made with B&M canned beans at 20 cents and Oscar Mayer Franks at 35 cents a package. You added a tablespoon of brown sugar, a squeeze of mustard, and half an onion. 15 minutes on the stove. The whole meal cost about 65 cents for a family of 4. You served it with B&M brown bread from a can, which cost 15 cents. Nobody in New England questioned it. Nobody tried to improve it. It was the same every Saturday, the way church was the same every Sunday. Your grandfather ate it. His father ate it. That rhythm was not monotony. It was the architecture of a life that did not need variety to feel complete. Before anyone called it a one-dish dinner, stuffed bell peppers already were one. The vegetable was the bowl, the protein was inside, and it came out of the oven complete. You blanched whole green peppers just enough to make them pliable, stood them upright in a baking dish, and filled each with ground beef browned with onion and garlic, folded with rice and tomatoes. Sauce over the top, 40 minutes at 350. The secret was the blanching. Skip it, and the pepper stayed raw and bitter at the center no matter how long it baked, and you learned that mistake exactly once. The dish appeared in 1970s dinner party menus and across millions of recipe boxes as a dependable weeknight anchor. It never fully disappeared from cookbooks, but it slipped from the weekly rotation when the extra time the blanching required stopped fitting. What replaced it wasn't better. It was just faster, and faster was enough. Pork chops on a school night meant she started with the onions, sliced thick and pushed around in bacon drippings until they went deep brown at the edges, filling the kitchen with something that made your stomach tighten before you sat down. The chops went in bone-in, browned hard on both sides, then the onions went back on top with a splash of water, lid on, low heat for 45 minutes. Smothered pork chops showed up on weeknight tables across the South and Midwest because bone-in loin chops were among the cheapest cuts at the butcher counter through the 1950s and 60s, and because the smothering technique turned a tough chop into something that fell apart on the fork. She never measured the water. She added it by sound, by whether the pan was still hissing the way it was supposed to. That was the whole lesson. The tomato had to be warm from the garden, not the refrigerator, never the store, and sliced thick enough that the juice ran down your wrist when you bit into the sandwich. 2 slices of soft white bread, a heavy spread of mayonnaise, thick rounds of a tomato still holding the heat of the afternoon sun, and enough salt to make the flavor crack open. This was lunch and sometimes supper across the entire American South, a meal so simple that writing it down felt insulting to the people who made it. Hellmann's, first mass-distributed in the 1920s, became the only acceptable brand. Using anything else was grounds for a kitchen argument that could last a whole summer. The sandwich existed only during tomato season. When the last vine died in September, it vanished, and no winter tomato from a grocery store could bring it back. Cypress knees. Stew drew its name and subtle flavor from the swampy roots of the cypress tree that lined bayou waters. Grandmothers simmered fresh fish, small shrimp, and local vegetables in a seasoned broth enriched with a few cleaned cypress knees, which released a gentle woodsy essence during cooking. The stew carried the spirit of the Louisiana wetlands, blending the sweetness of seafood with the mysterious aroma of the swamp. Served with crusty bread to soak up the broth, it warmed families after long days spent fishing or gathering along the water's edge. Children learned respect for the bayou as they watched elders harvest the knees carefully without harming the living trees. The dish reflected both reverence for nature and the inventive cooking that defined communities living close to the land. Cypress knees stew remains a rare and evocative taste of the Deep South, a recipe passed quietly from grandmother to grandchild as a celebration of place and patience. Steamed eggs on toast transformed breakfast ingredients into satisfying supper that cost almost nothing and came together in under 10 minutes. Seniors who survived the Depression understood that eggs were among the most affordable proteins, stretching further when combined with simple white sauce. The preparation began with melting butter in a saucepan, whisking in flour until smooth, then slowly adding milk while stirring until thickened. Hard-boiled eggs, already prepared and waiting in the refrigerator, were chopped and folded into this creamy base with salt and pepper. The mixture was spooned over buttered toast while still warm. The result was rich, filling, and deceptively elegant for something made from such humble ingredients. This dish fed widows and widowers across America during decades when eating alone meant cooking economically but eating well. The eggs provided protein while the toast gave substance, and the sauce made everything feel like someone had taken care. Dutch oven possum and sweet potatoes represented Appalachian cooking at its most resourceful. Possums trapped in late autumn, fattened on persimmons and acorns, gave their meat a sweetness that surprised the unfamiliar. The cleaned animal was parboiled to remove gaminess, then placed in a large Dutch oven surrounded by quartered sweet potatoes and onions. A mixture of bacon fat, molasses, and vinegar was brushed over everything before the heavy lid was sealed and the pot nestled into fireplace coals. Hours of slow roasting transformed possum into fork-tender meat, while sweet potatoes absorbed rich cooking juices, becoming almost candied. This wasn't desperation food. It was celebration food in communities where possums were plentiful and store-bought meat was not. The Dutch oven made it possible to cook an entire meal with no attention beyond occasionally rotating the pot. Families served it for special occasions, proud of the skill required to prepare it properly. Pork chop rice skillet was the kind of meal that simmered away while seniors rested in their chairs, filling small apartments with the aroma of home cooking. A single bone-in pork chop, often purchased on sale for mere cents per pound, was browned in a well-seasoned skillet until golden. Rice was added directly to the pan along with water or broth, and the whole thing was covered and left to cook slowly until the rice absorbed every drop of porky flavor. The meat became fork tender, practically falling off the bone, while the rice turned creamy and rich from the rendered fat. Some added a can of cream of mushroom soup to make it even more substantial, while others kept it simple with just salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The dish required almost no attention once assembled, making it perfect for those with limited energy or mobility. One pork chop and a cup of rice fed a senior for an entire day, proving that economy and satisfaction could share the same plate. Baked ham with pineapple rings and maraschino cherries was the iconic centerpiece that defined American Christmas through the 1960s and 70s. The ham, usually a bone-in shank or butt portion, was scored in diamond patterns, each intersection studded with a whole clove that released fragrance as it baked. Canned pineapple rings were arranged across the surface and secured with toothpicks, a bright red cherry placed in each ring's center. Brown sugar and mustard glaze was brushed over everything, caramelizing into sticky sweetness that dripped down the sides. The presentation was unmistakably festive, the ham gleaming amber and gold under dining room lights. Slicing revealed pink meat with that distinctive ham flavor that paired perfectly with sweet glaze. Families served this alongside scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, and dinner rolls. The pineapple cherry ham has become a punchline today, dismissed as kitschy, but for millions it represented Christmas abundance and maternal love. Number 23. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Families called it Tuesday. You opened a jar of dried beef, tore it into shreds, and stirred it into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. That was it. You poured the whole thing over toast and ate it with a fork. Soldiers brought this recipe home from the service and kept making it because it was fast and cheap and it filled you up when nothing else in the pantry would. The beef was salty enough to season the entire sauce on its own. Some cooks added a pinch of black pepper or a shake of paprika, but most did not bother. 2 slices of toast, a ladle of creamed beef, and dinner was done in 10 minutes. It was the kind of meal nobody bragged about and everybody made. Number 23. Salmon patties. A can of pink salmon, drained and picked clean of bones and skin, mixed with crushed saltine crackers, 1 beaten egg, and a little diced onion. You shaped them into flat rounds and fried them in Crisco or vegetable oil until they turned golden on both sides. Families across the South and the Midwest made these every Friday, partly because they were affordable and partly because a lot of Catholic households still avoided meat at the end of the week. Serve them alongside canned green beans and instant mashed potatoes, and you had a plate that looked like it took an hour. It took about 12 minutes from start to table, and I have never met a single person who grew up in the 1960s and does not remember the smell of salmon patties frying on a Friday afternoon. Number 22. American goulash. This had nothing to do with the Hungarian original. American goulash was a pound of ground beef browned in a Dutch oven, tossed with elbow macaroni, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a heavy pour of store-brand tomato sauce. Salt, pepper, maybe a shake of garlic powder if you were feeling bold. The whole pot fed 6 people for about $1.20, and it reheated the next day even better than it tasted fresh. In factory towns across Ohio and Michigan, goulash was Wednesday night. Not because anyone planned it that way. By Wednesday, you were tired, and the box of macaroni was always sitting in the cupboard. Mothers stirred it with one hand while holding a toddler on the opposite hip, and the pot was scraped clean by Thursday lunch. Number 25. Killed lettuce over a hot-baked potato. A bowl of leaf lettuce, sliced green onions, and a little salt. Hot bacon grease with a splash of cider vinegar gets poured directly over the leaves, and they wilt down in seconds. The whole bowl tips onto a split-baked potato. 1 potato, 1 handful of lettuce, 2 strips of bacon broken in. The Foxfire books recorded this as a spring supper across the Blue Ridge and the Smokies, gathered from hill country grandmothers in Rabun County and Macon County in the early 70s. It is sharp, hot, and finished in the time it takes the potato to come out of the oven. A solo plate sets up in 5 minutes flat, and the lettuce can be from a kitchen window planter through most of the year. Number 21. Hamburger gravy on toast. You browned half a pound of ground beef in cast iron, sprinkled 3 tablespoons of flour into the grease, stirred a minute, then poured in 2 cups of milk and thickened it. You poured the gray, peppery gravy over toast. 30 cents fed 4 in 1962. The Navy called it SOS for short, which stood for 2 words your grandmother would not say out loud. The dish first appeared in the 1910 Manual for Army Cooks and fed soldiers from World War I through Vietnam. The trick is, the flour cooks in the beef fat for a full minute before the milk goes in. That kills the raw taste. Your father did it without thinking. What most people miss is that the bread mattered as much as the gravy. White toast was wrong. You wanted Wonder Bread 3 days stale because the dry crumbs soaked the gravy without going to mush. Number 22. American chop suey. In Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, this was what your mother made when she had nothing planned. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, and canned tomatoes in 1 skillet. It had no connection to actual Chinese chop suey. The name was borrowed to make plain meat and pasta sound like something. The real Chinese-American chop suey dated back to the 1890s in San Francisco. The New England version was a completely different dish that showed up in every school cafeteria and every community fundraiser cookbook from Boston to Hartford. 1 pound of ground beef at 45 cents, a box of elbows at 15 cents, 2 cans of tomatoes at 10 cents each. You browned the beef, added everything else, covered the skillet, and walked away for 15 minutes. Under 90 cents for the whole meal. Every family in New England had a version, and every family thought theirs was the original. It was the dish that proved you did not need a name for something for it to be the best meal of the week. Chicken cacciatore, hunter style from the Italian, was built for tough birds, and by the 1970s it had settled so firmly into American home cooking that Better Homes and Gardens ran it beside pot roast as standard weeknight fare. Bone-in thighs and drumsticks into olive oil until the skin crisped, then onions, peppers, mushrooms, and garlic building in the same pan, then crushed tomatoes, a splash of white wine. The chicken nested back in skin side up, covered and simmered 45 minutes. The secret nobody recorded. Low heat and time could make cheap bone-in pieces taste like something worth effort. The bone was the whole point. It gave the sauce collagen and depth a boneless breast never could. When convenience cuts became the default in the 1980s, cacciatore stopped delivering. Most cooks let it go without a eulogy. Scalloped potatoes with ham required no announcement. Thin sliced raw potatoes, each one translucent enough to see through if held to the light, layered into a buttered baking dish with chopped leftover ham, a scattering of flour, salt, and enough whole milk to come almost to the top. Into a slow oven for an hour and a half until the milk thickened into cream sauce and the top layer of potato went golden and the edges pulled away from the dish. This was the dish that solved Monday. The ham bone from Sunday went into the navy beans, and whatever ham remained went here. Pennsylvania Dutch families had been making versions since the 1800s, brought from Germany and adapted to the root cellars and dairy farms of the Mid-Atlantic, and by the 1940s it was a staple from Ohio to Oregon. You knew it was done when a knife slid through the top with no resistance. You didn't set a timer, you paid attention. Sawmill gravy got its name in the lumber camps of the late 1800s, where cooks fed crews of men using nothing but flour, grease, milk, and black pepper in quantities large enough to fill a washtub. The gravy was thick, pale, peppery, and poured over anything that held still. Biscuits, toast, cornbread, fried potatoes. You started with a few spoonfuls of bacon drippings in a hot skillet, stirred in flour until it turned golden and smelled like toasted grain, then poured in milk slowly while scraping the bottom of the pan. The whole process took less than 10 minutes and fed a household for pennies. Some cooks called it bulldog gravy, and in the coal camps of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, it showed up at every meal, breakfast, dinner, and supper, because the mines paid low and the company store charged high. The pepper had to bite. If you couldn't feel the pepper, the gravy wasn't finished. She made it by sound. The sizzle of flour hitting grease told her everything a recipe never could. Pumpkin cornbread was a practical but delicious twist on a staple that hillbilly families relied on year-round. A quiet celebration of the harvest baked right into the batter. Adding mashed pumpkin to the mix made the cornbread softer, sweeter, and a little more festive for Thanksgiving, giving the bread a warm golden hue that fit perfectly with the season. It was an easy way to stretch ingredients and make use of whatever pumpkins the garden had produced, especially in years when crops were generous. The bread came out golden and fragrant, with a texture that landed somewhere between cornbread and cake, tender enough to eat plain but hearty enough to hold up beside stew or beans. Families ate it with butter, beans, stew, or even molasses drizzled on top, letting it fill the table with warmth. Over time, pumpkin cornbread disappeared as store-bought breads became the norm. But in homes that remember frugal cooking, it still tastes like the holidays, a dish wrapped in memory more than ingredients. Herb bread and milk bowl was perhaps the oldest and simplest supper in the American pantry, dating back centuries and persisting through every economic hardship. Seniors who remembered harder times often returned to this dish when cooking seemed too effortful and appetites had shrunk with age. The preparation required nothing more than tearing bread into pieces, placing them in a bowl, and pouring cold or warm milk over the top. Sugar was sprinkled according to taste, transforming the humble combination into something approaching dessert. Some preferred their bread and milk warm, heating the milk gently before pouring. Others liked it cold, especially during summer months. The bread softened quickly, becoming easy to eat with a spoon, gentle on sensitive stomachs and aging teeth. This was food stripped to its essence. For seniors eating alone, bread and milk represented self-sufficiency and comfort of familiar flavors, asking nothing and giving everything a tired body needed. Toast, cast iron squirrel, and rice turned small game. Every child learned to hunt into a complete dinner, requiring nothing but one heavy skillet. Young hunters brought home their catch cleaned and quartered, ready for the pan where pieces browned in lard until skin turned crispy. The squirrel was set aside while onions and celery softened, followed by long-grain rice that toasted until translucent. Stock was added along with the browned squirrel, then the skillet was covered until rice absorbed every bit of liquid and meat pulled easily from delicate bones. The flavor was nutty and rich, the squirrel meat darker and more complex than chicken could ever be. For rural families, this represented abundance found in woods behind their homes rather than expensive grocery stores. Children learned hunting wasn't sport, it was survival, and their contributions carried genuine weight. One skillet, a few squirrels, and a cup of rice meant dinner was handled with real dignity. Chicken fricassee was old-fashioned comfort that transformed tough, inexpensive chicken parts into tender, gravy-smothered perfection. Before boneless breasts dominated supermarket cases, seniors bought leg quarters for pennies and knew how to coax flavor from every piece. The chicken was dredged in seasoned flour and browned slowly in a deep skillet, building a fond on the bottom that would become rich gravy. Onions and celery joined the pan before liquid was added, and the whole pot simmered until the meat fell from the bones. The gravy thickened naturally from the flour coating, creating a velvety sauce that begged to be soaked up with bread or rice. One chicken leg quarter could feed a senior for 2 meals, when stretched with plenty of gravy over something starchy. The dish was forgiving, patient, and deeply satisfying. The kind of cooking that required time but rewarded it generously with flavor and nourishment that modern convenience foods simply cannot match. Standing rib roast was the king of Christmas meats, its impressive size and rich marbling commanding respect from the moment it emerged from the oven. Butchers prepared these roasts with the bones still attached, creating a natural rack that elevated the meat for even cooking. The exterior was rubbed with garlic, salt, pepper, and fresh herbs, then roasted at high heat to create a deeply browned crust before the temperature dropped for slow cooking. Slicing revealed a gradient from well-done edges to rosy pink centers, allowing guests to choose their preferred doneness. The bones were fought over, gnawed clean at the table, or saved for soup. Yorkshire pudding was the traditional accompaniment, the batter puffing dramatically in the hot beef drippings. This was investment cooking, the roast costing more than a week's grocery budget, but justified by the holiday's importance. Standing rib roast represented prosperity and tradition, connecting American families to English Christmas customs. Number 21. Hamburger gravy on biscuits. You browned ground beef in a skillet, sprinkled flour over the meat, and stirred in milk until you had a thick, pale gravy studded with crumbled hamburger. Salt, pepper, and nothing else. Then you split open a hot biscuit and spooned the gravy over both halves until it ran down the sides and pooled on the plate. Some families used canned biscuits, others made them from scratch with lard and buttermilk. Either way, the meal took 15 minutes from cold skillet to table. This was payday -3 food. The kind of supper that used one ingredient stretched with flour and milk into something that stuck to your ribs and kept you full through the night. Men who worked road crews and factory floors ate this twice a week without complaint. It filled the same hole a roast would have filled, at a fraction of the cost. In most American homes in the 1950s, dinner was not a decision. It was a schedule. Monday was meatloaf. Tuesday was something from a can. Wednesday was whatever the butcher had marked down. Thursday was leftovers rearranged into a casserole. Friday was fish if you were Catholic and pancakes if you were not. Saturday was hamburgers or hot dogs. Sunday was the only meal anyone planned with any real intention. Nobody scrolled through recipes. Nobody asked the family what they were in the mood for. The woman running that kitchen knew what she had in the refrigerator and how far she could stretch it until payday. That rotation was not boring. It was a system built on knowing exactly what you could afford and making it last. The meals on this list came out of that rotation. They were never exciting. They were always there. Number 20. Oxtail soup. Butchers used to practically give oxtails away because nobody with money wanted them. A couple pounds of oxtails, a few carrots, celery, an onion, and enough water to fill a stock pot. You simmered it for 3 or 4 hours until the meat slid off the bone and the broth turned dark and gelatinous from the collagen. No thickener needed. A bowl of oxtail soup on a January night in 1958 was one of the most satisfying dinners a family could eat, and the whole pot cost less than $1. Today, oxtails sell for $8 or $9 a pound at most grocery stores. The dinner that poor families made because they could not afford anything better became too expensive for those same families to make. Number 20. Oxtail soup. Butchers used to practically give oxtails away because nobody with money wanted them. A couple pounds of oxtails, a few carrots, celery, an onion, and enough water to fill a stock pot. You simmered it for 3 or 4 hours until the meat slid off the bone and the broth turned dark and gelatinous from the collagen. No thickener needed. A bowl of oxtail soup on a January night in 1958 was one of the most satisfying dinners a family could eat, and the whole pot cost less than $1. Today, oxtails sell for $8 or $9 a pound at most grocery stores. The dinner that poor families made because they could not afford anything better became too expensive for those same families to make. Number 24. Hot water cornbread, cornmeal, and a pinch of salt in a tin bowl, boiling water poured over, stirred until it just holds together as a thick paste. Patted into 3 small cakes and fried in hot bacon grease until the edges are lace. Kratos Williams, the Appalachian scholar from Watauga County, wrote that hot water cornbread was the first supper a child learned to make and the last one an old widow stopped making. There is no egg, no buttermilk, no leavening, and the recipe survived 2 centuries of mountain winters because it works with whatever is left in the cornmeal sack. 3 cakes feed 1 person well, with 2 left over for breakfast, cold and crumbled into coffee. The dish has lived in the mountains since before the railroads came, and it has not changed its shape since. Number 20. Tuna noodle casserole. You opened a can of chicken of the sea, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, boiled egg noodles, mixed it with a cup of milk, topped it with crushed potato chips, and broiled it 10 minutes. The first printed recipe came out of Sunset magazine in 1930 from a Kennewick, Washington woman named only as Mrs. WFS. Campbell's introduced cream of mushroom soup in 1934, and that one product is the reason your grandmother made this every Thursday for 31 years. By 1959, 8 out of 10 households served canned tuna weekly, with this casserole in the top 3 uses. It fed a working family of 5 for less than $1. It still does. Your aunt is still making it. The genius detail was the potato chip crust on top, which turned to glass under the broiler and shattered when you ran the spoon through the dish. The crunch is what your cousins remembered, not the tuna, the chips. Number 21. Hash brown skillet with ground beef. This was the meal American men cooked when their wives were not home. It required no recipe and no finesse. Ground beef, diced potatoes, an onion, and whatever canned vegetable was in the pantry. You fried it all together in a cast iron skillet until the potatoes were crispy. The whole thing cost about 80 cents. By 1955, Westerns dominated American television. Gunsmoke premiered that September. Wagon Train followed in 1957. Cowboy-themed recipes started appearing in women's magazines, and skillet hash got a new name: ranch skillet, cowboy supper, trail pan. The food was the same. The marketing was different. A man standing over a cast-iron skillet felt like something out of a frontier story, even if he was standing in a kitchen in Levittown. It was the only meal in the 1950s that men took credit for cooking. Everything else belonged to the women. This one, for some reason, belonged to the cowboys. Long before Tuesday needed a theme, American chop suey was already solving the problem. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, onion, everything in one pan until the pasta absorbed the liquid. The name borrowed from Chinese cooking, chop suey, appeared in print as early as the late 1800s, derived from Cantonese for a little of this and that. But the dish had no connection to any Chinese kitchen. In New England, it was simply chop suey. In the Midwest, they called it American goulash. In Ohio, it became a baked casserole called Johnny Marzetti. You could tell where someone was raised by what they called it, and whether cheese went in at the end, and whether the green pepper was required or optional. Nobody agreed on any of it. Everybody's mother made the only correct version. The dish has never entirely gone, but the name has mostly faded. Most people under 30 call it pasta with meat sauce, unaware they're eating something that fed entire neighborhoods for most of a century. If scalloped potatoes made Monday manageable, American goulash, or Johnny Marzetti, depending on which side of Ohio you grew up on, made Wednesday disappear entirely. Elbow macaroni, browned ground beef, canned tomatoes, cooked together in one pot until the pasta absorbed most of the sauce and everything went sticky at the edges. The name came from Teresa Marzetti, who ran a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio in the 1920s and served a baked version that spread through Midwest community cookbooks and school cafeteria programs for 50 years. By the 1950s, some version appeared on nearly every school lunch tray in the state. Johnny Marzetti in Ohio, American chop suey in New England, goulash everywhere else. The same dish, renamed by whoever got there first. At home, the trick was in the waiting. Right off the stove, it was good. The next day, cold from the refrigerator with the macaroni swollen and the sauce thickened into something almost solid, it was better. The kids who knew that were the ones who got there first in the morning. But before anything could be stretched or seasoned, someone had to know what was safe to eat from the ground, and poke salad was the test that separated mountain cooks from everyone else. Phytolacca americana, pokeweed, grew wild along fence rows and ditch banks across the Appalachian South, and in early spring the young shoots were one of the first greens available to families who had eaten nothing fresh since autumn. The plant was toxic if handled wrong. You boiled the leaves 3 separate times, draining and replacing the water each round to pull the poison out before the greens were safe to eat. After the 3rd boil, you fried them in bacon grease with salt, and they turned dark, tender, and rich, tasting like a cross between spinach and asparagus. Cherokee and rural Appalachian families had been preparing poke this way for generations, and the knowledge passed by standing at the stove, not from any book. One wrong step, skipping a boil, picking leaves too mature, and the dish could make you sick. You either knew how or you didn't touch it. Fried cornbread hoe cakes were the sound of supper sizzling in a skillet. Cornmeal, water, salt, and a little grease were all you needed to turn a handful of nothing into a golden brown meal. Hillbilly kitchens loved this trick because it was fast, cheap, and never disappointed. You would drop spoonfuls of batter into the pan, listen for that familiar hiss, and wait for the edges to crisp. Hoe cakes were bread, but they were also pride, a way to make the table feel full even when meat was missing. They paired with beans, greens, and gravy, soaking up every last bit of flavor. No fork was needed, just hands and hunger. The smell alone could stop anyone passing by. Fried cornbread hoe cakes were the mountain version of comfort food, simple fried perfection that spoke louder than any recipe ever could. They were proof that flavor comes from fire, patience, and heart. Toast with bacon drippings carried the rich memory of breakfast into evening meals, using saved fat that thrifty households never discarded. During the 1940s through 70s, seniors understood that bacon grease collected in jars beside the stove was liquid gold for flavoring and spreading. A slice of bread was toasted until golden, then spread while warm with a thin layer of cool drippings seasoned with salt from countless previous cookings. The fat melted slightly into warm bread, creating savory richness that satisfied hunger and stretched resources. Some seniors sprinkled their dripping toast with black pepper or topped it with tomato slices when gardens were producing. The flavor was deeply porky, slightly smoky, and wholly comforting to those who remembered when nothing edible was ever thrown away. This single slice often served as complete supper when appetites were small. Toast with bacon drippings represented waste-nothing kitchens where every ingredient served multiple purposes. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers turned a simple egg into an interactive meal that brought small pleasure to solitary dining. Seniors who grew up with this British-influenced tradition continued preparing it well into later years, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. The egg was lowered gently into boiling water and cooked for exactly 3 to 4 minutes, producing set white and gloriously runny yolk. Meanwhile, toast was prepared and cut into narrow strips called soldiers, ready for dipping. The egg sat in a small cup, its top carefully removed to reveal golden liquid within. Each toast soldier was dipped into the yolk, emerging coated in rich goodness that made plain bread taste extraordinary. The meal cost almost nothing yet felt ceremonial, requiring attention that gave structure to evenings that might otherwise blur together. For seniors eating alone, the process of dipping and eating provided small entertainment alongside nourishment. Chicken bog was a low-country Carolina tradition that turned one old hen and a bag of rice into a feast for a crowd. The dish got its name from the way rice bogged down in rich chicken broth, becoming almost creamy while still holding individual grains. A whole stewing hen, past her laying days, went into a large cast-iron pot with onions and celery, simmering until meat fell from bones. The chicken was pulled out and shredded while rice went directly into seasoned broth, cooking until it absorbed nearly all liquid. Shredded meat returned along with generous butter and black pepper. Everything stirred until the bog reached its characteristic consistency, wet but not soupy, rich but not heavy. Churches served it at fundraisers, families made it for reunions, and neighbors cooked it when someone needed feeding. One pot could serve 20 people, making chicken bog the original crowd-pleasing one-pot meal born from necessity and perfected through community. Corned beef hash from a can became an unlikely hero for seniors who needed hot, filling meals without the fuss of extensive preparation. The rectangular cans lined grocery store shelves at budget-friendly prices, containing a mixture of corned beef and potatoes that transformed when properly cooked. The secret was patience, spreading the hash in a hot, greased skillet and leaving it alone until a dark, crispy crust formed on the bottom. That crust was the prize, shattering against the teeth before giving way to the soft, savory interior. A fried egg placed on top turned it into a complete meal, the runny yolk creating an instant sauce that coated every bite. Seniors living alone appreciated that a single can provided 2 generous servings, each one satisfying enough to carry them through to the next meal. The dish required only a skillet and a few minutes of attention, making it perfect for those days when cooking felt like too much effort. Corned beef hash proved that convenience and comfort could coexist beautifully. Oyster stew was the Christmas Eve tradition that brought coastal flavors to holiday tables across America, even in landlocked states. Fresh oysters were gently poached in their own liquor with butter, cream, and just enough seasoning to enhance their briny sweetness. The stew was served in warmed bowls with oyster crackers floating on top, each spoonful delivering plump oysters in rich, silky broth. Families maintained this tradition from generations past, when oysters were abundant and affordable enough for working-class celebrations. The dish required restraint. Overcooking turned oysters rubbery. Too much seasoning masked their delicate flavor. Some families added celery or a touch of sherry, but purists insisted on simplicity. By the 1980s, oyster prices had risen and the tradition faded. Those who grew up with oyster stew Christmas Eves remember the ritual of shucking, the anticipation, and the briny warmth that meant the holiday had truly begun. Number 19. Wiener and bean bake. You sliced a package of hot dogs into coins, stirred them into 2 cans of pork and beans, added a spoonful of yellow mustard and a squeeze of ketchup, and poured the whole thing into a baking dish. Some families laid extra hot dog halves across the top like little logs. Others mixed in diced onion or a handful of brown sugar. Then you baked it until the edges bubbled and the sauce turned thick and dark. This was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was not in any cookbook. It was the meal that happened when a mother opened the refrigerator, found a package of Franks and not much else, and reached for the canned beans on the shelf because she knew the combination worked. Every family had a version. The variations were small and fiercely defended. Some used barbecue sauce instead of ketchup. Others stirred in a can of drained pineapple chunks, which sounds wrong but tasted like summer. A few families in the Midwest topped the dish with cornbread batter and baked it until the bread rose up golden over the beans. Children loved it because it tasted like a backyard cookout served indoors. Parents loved it because the whole dish cost less than the gas it took to drive to the store. 1 package of hot dogs and 2 cans of beans fed a table of 6, and the baking dish came out of the oven looking like something you had planned all along. Number 18. Liver and onions. Beef liver sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and pan-fried in bacon grease until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed just barely pink. The onions went into the same pan, sliced into rings and cooked slow until they turned sweet and translucent. Served with mashed potatoes and a cold glass of whole milk, this showed up on tables across the country at least once a week during the 1960s. Mothers told their children it was good for the blood, which happened to be true. Most children hated it. Most adults pretended not to notice. But the combination of crispy liver and soft sweet onions was genuinely delicious if you gave it half a chance, and a whole generation grew up strong on a dinner they complained about every single time it appeared. Number 19. Cabbage rolls. In the coal towns of eastern Pennsylvania and the steel towns strung along the Ohio River Valley, cabbage rolls were not just a meal, they were an identity. Polish, Czech, Slovak, and Hungarian families brought the recipe across the Atlantic, and by the 1940s, cabbage rolls had become as American as the church basement where they were served. You boiled a whole head of cabbage until the leaves softened, then peeled them off one at a time, careful not to tear. The filling was ground beef or pork mixed with cooked rice, a little onion, salt, pepper, and sometimes a beaten egg to hold everything together. You rolled each leaf tight around a spoonful of filling, tucked the edges in like a small envelope, and packed them snug into a deep baking dish. The sauce was tomato, usually from a can, poured over the top before the whole thing went into the oven for an hour. 1 large head of cabbage and a pound of meat made enough rolls to feed 8 people, and the extras never stayed in the house. That was the thing about cabbage rolls. You never made them just for your own family. The leftovers went to the neighbor recovering from surgery, the widow at the end of the block, or the potluck table at St. Stanislaus on Sunday. Dorothy Sams, the woman from the opening of this video, made her cabbage rolls with pork because it was cheaper than beef in Pikeville, and she wrapped them in newspaper to keep them warm on the walk to the church hall. The whole batch cost her less than $1.50. It fed 30 people, and not a single roll came home. Number 22. Pinto beans simmered all afternoon. This is the dinner that runs the rest of the list, because the pot sits at the back of the stove from 1 in the afternoon until 5 and asks for almost nothing. A cup of dry pintos soaked since the night before, cold water just over the top of the beans, a piece of streaked side meat about the length of a thumb, a quartered onion, no salt at the start, because salt at the start keeps the bean skin tight, and a tight skin will not let the broth in. The pot goes on the stove with the burner turned so low that 1 bubble breaks the surface every 10 seconds. That is the rate, and it does not change for 3 hours. The kitchen begins to smell of pork and onion at the 2nd hour, and by the 3rd, the broth has turned the color of strong tea. Salt goes in only at the end, and a slosh of vinegar goes in with it. The beans come off the heat and rest in their own broth for 15 minutes before the first spoonful, because the bean keeps cooking on the way to the bowl. A half cup of dry pintos makes 2 suppers for 1 person. The leftover beans the next day are better than the first, And the broth is what most people overlook, because the broth is where the whole pot put itself. A wedge of cornbread crumbled and turns the bowl into a meal that no restaurant in any city has ever quite produced. A senior in Hancock County, Tennessee, who has been doing this since 1956, will say that the pot teaches patience to the person who tends it, and that patience is the missing ingredient in modern cooking. The dish is one of the cheapest in the American repertoire, and at the same time, it is the most filling. That is the trick the cookbooks never quite captured, because the trick is the time. Number 19. American chop suey. You browned a pound of ground beef with a chopped onion, added a can of tomato sauce and a can of stewed tomatoes, stirred in 2 cups of cooked elbow macaroni, and called it dinner. New England called it chop suey. Michigan called it goulash. In Pittsburgh, your father called it Tuesday. The earliest printed recipe goes back to 1909. The version your grandmother knew came from a 1958 cookbook that added bacon and green peppers and stretched the pan to 6 people. But that is the working definition of genius: cheap, filling, shameless. And the real engineering inside the bowl was the elbow macaroni itself, because the curl of the noodle held a tablespoon of tomato sauce on its own, which meant a single spoonful delivered 3 things at once: the meat, the starch, and the sauce. Number 20. Creamed tuna on toast. Every Friday in Catholic America, millions of families needed a cheap dinner with no meat. The Catholic Church's Meatless Friday rule, which stayed in place until 1966, created guaranteed demand for this dish in cities like Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. You made a white sauce in 1 saucepan: butter, flour, milk. You folded in a can of tuna at 25 cents and a handful of frozen peas. You poured it over toast. The whole meal cost about 55 cents. It was the same dish as creamed chipped beef, only with fish instead of dried meat. Children who grew up in Catholic households in the 1950s remember it as the taste of Friday. Some remember it with nostalgia. Some remember it with dread. Most remember both at the same time. The Meatless Friday rule shaped an entire generation of home cooking. When the rule was relaxed in 1966, creamed tuna on toast disappeared from millions of kitchens almost overnight. The dish had no loyalty outside the obligation. Nobody called it a recipe. There was ground beef and potatoes in the bin, and that was the plan. The beef browned with diced onion, broken up but left with some texture. Some fat stayed in the pan deliberately. Flour stirred through until it disappeared, then beef broth poured slowly, pulling up everything the beef had left behind on the bottom. 3 minutes over medium heat, and it thickened into something dark, glossy, and full of depth that no gravy packet ever replicated, because the flavor was in the fond, the browned bits, and you only got those by starting with the meat itself. Over hand-mashed potatoes, salt, and butter, nothing else. 20 minutes total. The house smelled like someone was paying attention. She never named what she did between the browning and the broth. You figured it out years later, alone in your own kitchen, the moment the gravy hit the right color and sheen, and felt something that was difficult to name, but that had her in it. Creamed chipped beef on toast had a name that polite company didn't repeat, and the soldiers who ate it in mess halls from the First World War through Korea knew exactly what that name was. The Army had been serving dried, salt-cured beef, shaved thin and folded into white gravy, butter, flour, and milk, since the early 1900s, when it needed a high-protein, shelf-stable staple it could produce in bulk. When the men came home, a generation of wives learned to make it because their husbands asked. The dried beef came in small glass jars at the grocery, packed by Armour or Hormel, paper-thin slices folded like damp pages. You soaked them briefly to pull some of the salt, added them to the roux at the last minute, let the sauce coat every piece. Spooned over thick white toast, it filled you in the way only cheap food can, the kind that sits in you for hours. By the 1970s, it had largely left the family table, but one smell of that buttery salt on toast and 40 years disappear. Leftover pintos never went to waste in a mountain kitchen, not when you could mash them, shape them into patties, and fry them in a hot skillet until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed soft and warm. Bean cakes were the second life of a pot of soup beans, made the day after the original meal when the beans had thickened overnight in the refrigerator or on the back of the stove. You mashed them with a fork, mixed in a handful of cornmeal or flour to hold them together, and fried them flat in bacon grease. During the Depression, when a 12-cent bag of dried pintos could feed a family for 3 days, bean cakes extended that to 4. The first day was soup beans with cornbread. The second day was bean cakes fried for supper. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown out. Every calorie pulled from that single bag of dried beans. The cornmeal crust gave them a crunch the original beans never had, and that crunch made it feel like a different meal entirely. Drying in attic rafters preserved the medicinal and culinary plants that mountain families depended on when doctors were distant and pharmacies non-existent. Scientists now confirm that slow air drying at moderate temperatures preserves the essential oils, volatile compounds, and active constituents that give herbs their power. Mountain women who hung bundles of sage, thyme, mint, and medicinal plants from ceiling beams were creating conditions that modern herb processors attempt to replicate with controlled environments. The warm, dry air circulating through attic spaces drew moisture from plant material without the heat damage that faster methods cause. Dried herbs, stored in glass jars or cloth bags, retained potency for months, providing seasoning and remedies through long winters. Food scientists studying traditional preservation now document that air-dried herbs contain higher concentrations of beneficial compounds than commercially processed alternatives. Cottage cheese and canned fruit became staple supper for seniors who needed protein without cooking effort and welcomed sweetness without dessert guilt. This combination required nothing more than spooning cottage cheese onto a plate and arranging canned peach halves, pear slices, or fruit cocktail alongside. The curds provided protein and calcium, while fruit offered vitamins and comfort of something sweet. During the 1950s and 60s, this was considered health food, recommended by doctors for patients needing gentle nourishment. The cottage cheese came in different curd sizes according to preference, and canned fruit ranged from budget brands to premium varieties. Some seniors added cinnamon or honey when company feelings struck. The cost remained minimal, since both ingredients kept well and stretched across multiple meals. Cottage cheese and canned fruit represented the intersection of economy and nutrition that practical seniors navigated daily, providing satisfaction without demanding time or energy. Pork jowl and turnip greens came together in a single pot to create something far greater than either ingredient could offer alone. Pork jowl, fatty, flavorful meat from a pig's cheek, often smoked or cured, gave richness that infused everything it touched. The jowl went in first, rendering its fat while developing a crispy exterior. Turnip greens gathered from fall gardens after frost sweetened their leaves were added in great handfuls along with water, vinegar, and a touch of sugar to balance natural bitterness. The pot simmered for hours, greens cooking down to silky tenderness while absorbing smoky pork flavor throughout. Families valued this because both ingredients were home-raised or home-grown, requiring no cash outlay. The pot liquor was never discarded. It was sipped with cornbread or saved for soup. This was peasant food elevated through understanding that slow cooking and good fat could transform the humblest vegetables into something approaching luxury. Fried cabbage and sausage was a one-pan wonder that stretched a single link of smoked sausage into a meal that fed body and soul alike. Cabbage cost almost nothing and kept for weeks in the refrigerator, making it a staple for seniors watching their budgets. The sausage was sliced into coins and browned until the fat rendered out. Then shredded cabbage was added and cooked until wilted and slightly caramelized. The cabbage absorbed the smoky, porky flavor from the drippings, transforming from a humble vegetable into something deeply satisfying. A splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of caraway seeds added complexity without adding cost. The dish came together in under 20 minutes and required nothing more than a cutting board and a skillet. One small head of cabbage and one sausage link created enough food for 3 meals, making it extraordinarily economical. The sweetness of the cooked cabbage balanced the salty richness of the sausage perfectly, proving that poverty cooking could produce genuinely delicious results. Stuffed Cornish game hens were the elegant individual servings that made every guest feel specially honored at Christmas dinner. These small birds, each just large enough for one person, were stuffed with wild rice, dried fruit, and nuts before roasting to golden perfection. The presentation was stunning, each guest receiving their own whole bird, its skin crackling and its cavity overflowing with aromatic stuffing. Carving was unnecessary. Diners simply cut into their personal hen, the juices pooling on the plate. Families who served Cornish hens were making a statement about sophistication and abundance, providing individual birds rather than slicing from a shared roast. The hens were often glazed with orange or apricot preserves, adding sweetness and shine. This dish represented the era's fascination with elevated home entertaining when suburban hostesses aspired to elegance. Cornish hens have largely disappeared from Christmas tables, replaced by simpler preparations. Number 20. Creamed eggs on toast. You hard-boiled half a dozen eggs, peeled them, and chopped them into rough chunks. Then you made a white sauce in a saucepan, the same one you used for everything else. Butter, flour, and milk, stirred until it thickened. You folded the chopped eggs into the sauce and spooned the whole thing over slices of toast on a plate. Some families called it goldenrod eggs because of the color. Others just called it eggs on toast and moved on. The meal cost almost nothing and took 15 minutes. It showed up on Friday nights in Catholic homes and on any night the grocery money had run thin. You added salt and pepper and maybe a few canned peas on the side, and that was dinner. Nobody remembered it fondly. Everybody ate it. Number 19. Cabbage rolls. In the coal towns of eastern Pennsylvania and the steel towns strung along the Ohio River Valley, cabbage rolls were not just a meal, they were an identity. Polish, Czech, Slovak, and Hungarian families brought the recipe across the Atlantic, and by the 1940s, cabbage rolls had become as American as the church basement where they were served. You boiled a whole head of cabbage until the leaves softened, then peeled them off one at a time, careful not to tear. The filling was ground beef or pork mixed with cooked rice, a little onion, salt, pepper, and sometimes a beaten egg to hold everything together. You rolled each leaf tight around a spoonful of filling, tucked the edges in like a small envelope, and packed them snug into a deep baking dish. The sauce was tomato, usually from a can, poured over the top before the whole thing went into the oven for an hour. One large head of cabbage and a pound of meat made enough rolls to feed 8 people, and the extras never stayed in the house. That was the thing about cabbage rolls. You never made them just for your own family. The leftovers went to the neighbor recovering from surgery, the widow at the end of the block, or the potluck table at St. Stanislaus on Sunday. Dorothy Sams, the woman from the opening of this video, made her cabbage rolls with pork because it was cheaper than beef in Pikeville, and she wrapped them in newspaper to keep them warm on the walk to the church hall. The whole batch cost her less than $1.50. It fed 30 people, and not a single roll came home. Number 18. Liver and onions. Beef liver sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and pan-fried in bacon grease until the outside turned crisp and the inside stayed just barely pink. The onions went into the same pan, sliced into rings and cooked slow until they turned sweet and translucent. Served with mashed potatoes and a cold glass of whole milk, this showed up on tables across the country at least once a week during the 1960s. Mothers told their children it was good for the blood, which happened to be true. Most children hated it. Most adults pretended not to notice. But the combination of crispy liver and soft sweet onions was genuinely delicious if you gave it half a chance, and a whole generation grew up strong on a dinner they complained about every single time it appeared. Number 21. Cat head biscuit with sorghum. A biscuit the size of a cat's head, made from self-rising flour, lard, and buttermilk, baked at 450 until the top is the color of a deer hide. Split it open while it is still hot enough to burn a thumb. A spoon of dark sorghum molasses goes inside, and the molasses melts into the crumb and runs down a finger. Loyal Jones wrote that in the southern mountains, the cathead biscuit with sorghum was supper for any man or woman alone in the house, and Joseph Dabney recorded the same dish across the smokehouse counties of East Tennessee. The recipe makes 4 biscuits at a time, 3 for now, 1 for breakfast. A jar of dark Tennessee sorghum lasts a single person an entire winter. The sweetness is mineral and almost bitter at the back of the tongue, nothing like store syrup, and a single biscuit fills the plate without crowding it. Number 20. Brown beans with a slice of raw onion. The same pinto pot as number 22, but cooked plainer and served with a thick slice of white onion laid right on top of the beans. A small piece of cornbread on the side. Hill country families in McMinn County ate this 2 nights a week from October to April. The onion sweats into the broth and turns the whole bowl into something sharper than its parts. For one person, a coffee mug of beans and 1 slice of onion is a meal that a working hand could finish standing up. The leftover broth goes into a thermos for the next day's lunch, and nothing in the pot ever ends up in the chicken bucket. The dish is what a Hill widow eats on the days when nothing else needs doing. Number 17. Pasta and peas. You diced a potato, diced half an onion, fried them in olive oil until soft, dumped in a can of peas with its liquid, added water to cook a half pound of rigatoni. A woman named Clara Canucciari grew up eating it in upstate New York during the Depression and made it famous on YouTube at age 91 before she passed at 98. She said pasta was the crutch her family leaned on when there was no meat for the table, no money for the rent, and no light at the end of the calendar. The potato thickens the broth, the pea liquid salts the sauce, the pasta holds on to everything. 40 cents in 1934. $2 and change today. Cheaper than fast food? Better than fast food. Clara cooked the pasta directly in the pea water because the starch and the canning salt built a glossy sauce without butter. She made it the way her grandmother had on a wood stove. Number 18. Porcupine meatballs. This recipe survived the Depression and walked straight into the 1950s without changing a single ingredient. You mixed a pound of ground beef with 1/3 of a cup of raw long-grain rice, an egg, salt, and Worcestershire sauce. You rolled them into balls. The rice was the trick. It cooked inside the meatball, poking out like quills, and it stretched a single pound of beef into twice as many servings. You browned the balls in a skillet, poured in a can of Campbell's tomato soup diluted with water, covered the pan, and simmered for 40 minutes. The whole meal cost about 70 cents. Betty Crocker put it in her picture cookbook in 1950. Better Homes and Gardens printed it through the entire decade. Church cookbooks in Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee carried it well into the 1960s. In rural Appalachia, a mother named Eileen Combs made porcupine meatballs every Monday for 8 years. She stretched 1 pound of ground beef across 7 plates. Her husband worked at the coal mine in Harlan County, Kentucky, and brought home $42 a week. She spent 9 of those dollars on groceries. The meatballs were the anchor of her weekly rotation. The dish embodied a contradiction that defined the era. The post-war prosperity was real. Families were buying houses, cars, television sets. But millions of households, particularly in the rural South and Midwest, were still feeding large families on Depression logic. Porcupine meatballs were a survival strategy dressed in Eisenhower-era clothing. You could serve them to company and nobody would know the recipe was born out of desperation. That was the point. The rice inside the meatball was not a garnish. It was a way to make less look like enough. And for a generation of mothers who remembered what real hunger felt like, making less look like enough was not laziness. It was a skill passed down by women who learned it from their own mothers during the worst years this country has known. The name came from what happened in the pot. Raw, long-grain rice mixed into ground beef, rolled into balls, and when they cooked, the rice swelled through the meat in every direction like quills. Porcupine meatballs dated to the Great Depression, when a 1/4 pound of beef had to stretch to feed 4, and rice made that math disappear. A can of Campbell's tomato soup thinned with water was the braising liquid. Sweet, tannic, cheap. 30 minutes covered, 30 more uncovered. Genuinely good. Tender, savory, the rice adding a chew that made them feel like more than they cost. They appeared on American tables from the 30s through the 70s, outlasting the Depression that created them by 4 decades. She made them when money was short, and she didn't want you to know. You didn't. You just ate, and there was always enough. 16. Milk toast. You toasted 2 slices of stale white bread, dropped them in a wide bowl, heated a cup of milk just below a simmer, melted butter and sugar on the toast, then poured the hot milk over with a sprinkle of nutmeg. That was supper on a sick night in 1934. That was breakfast on a cold morning in 1947. Mark Twain ate it. Every grandmother in the Midwest made it for a child with a fever or a husband worn out from the late shift. The bread softened just enough to hold a spoon. The milk turned sweet from the butter melting under it. It cost less than a nickel a bowl. The genius was the staling. Day-old bread held the shape of a slice under hot milk. Fresh bread fell apart inside 90 seconds. Your grandmother set aside the heel of every loaf for milk toast, and that was how a kitchen wasted nothing across a generation. It still tastes like being loved. Number 19. Liver and onions with gravy. Good Housekeeping ran it in January 1952 under the heading Thrifty Meals That Are Easy to Prepare. Beef liver cost 28 cents a pound in the mid-1950s, roughly half the price of ground beef. Pediatric nutrition literature of the era called it a superfood packed with iron and vitamin A. Mothers had scientific backing to serve it. You soaked the liver in buttermilk for 30 minutes, dredged it in flour, and fried it in a skillet with caramelized onions. A splash of beef broth in the pan made the gravy. The whole meal cost about 55 cents. It was mother's medicine disguised as dinner. By the 1960s, as families could afford better cuts, liver began a decline that has never reversed. The generation that grew up eating it swore they would never serve it to their own children. Most kept that promise. Salmon patties on Friday nights were not optional, and not because anyone particularly loved them. Before Vatican II relaxed the rules in the early 1960s, Catholic families, and many households that simply followed the custom by habit, kept Friday as a meatless day. Canned salmon was the answer. It came from the Alaska and Pacific Northwest canneries operating since the 1880s, packed in flat oval tins at a price within reach of almost any household. You drained the liquid, mashed in the soft spine bones because your mother knew they were calcium, combined the salmon with cracker crumbs, beaten egg, a little onion, salt, and pepper, formed patties, and fried them in a cast iron skillet until both sides were deeply browned. Crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, smelling like the sea in a way that felt out of place in a landlocked kitchen. She made tartar sauce from scratch, mayonnaise, pickle relish, a squeeze of lemon if there was one. Every Friday, without variation, without complaint, without a recipe card in sight. Souse meat with crackers was Christmas appetizer that transformed pork scraps into delicacy through careful preparation. The souse was made from pig heads, feet, and ears boiled until tender, then chopped fine and bound with gelatin from bones. Vinegar, onions, and spices were added before pressing mixture into loaf pans to set. By Christmas, the souse sliced clean, its texture firm and slightly gelatinous, its flavor tangy and rich. Served cold with saltine crackers, this was Christmas snacking that represented complete hog utilization. In mountain communities, souse meant respect for animals and refusal to waste anything. The vinegar preserved meat while adding brightness that cut through richness. Children learned to appreciate souse as grown-up food, its complex flavors marking passage into adult tastes. This was Christmas tradition born from necessity, proving that the finest cooking often came from using everything and wasting nothing. Stewed tomatoes on toast brought garden flavor to supper tables using canned tomatoes that cost pennies and required almost no preparation. Seniors who had canned their own tomatoes during summer or purchased store brands during lean times understood this humble ingredient's versatility. The tomatoes were heated in a small saucepan with butter, salt, sugar, and sometimes torn bread pieces that thickened the liquid into something approaching sauce. This warm mixture was spooned over buttered toast that soaked up the juices gratefully. The combination provided vitamins, fiber, and comfort of something warm and savory. Some seniors added black pepper or Worcestershire sauce to deepen flavors. Others kept things simple, letting tomatoes speak for themselves. The dish appeared on tables across America during decades when making do meant making delicious from almost nothing. Stewed tomatoes on toast proved that a can of tomatoes and bread slice could become something worth sitting down to eat properly. Smothered pork steaks turned tough cuts into tender meals through nothing more than a covered skillet and thyme. Pork shoulder steaks, inexpensive slices from the hardest working part of the pig, were seasoned heavily and browned in hot cast iron until crusted. The meat came out while sliced onions and bell peppers went in, softening in rendered pork fat. Everything returned to the skillet with just enough liquid to create steam. Then the heavy lid went on and the flame turned low. Hours of slow smothering broke down tough connective tissue while vegetables melted into gravy. The finished steaks could be cut with a fork, saturated with rich sauce created by their own braising. This was weeknight food in working-class households where cheaper cuts were all budgets allowed. Mothers knew that the same weight of shoulder cost half what chops did, and with proper technique produced meals just as satisfying. The smothering method freed time for other work. Ham and scalloped potatoes baked together in a single dish created the kind of meal that felt fancy despite its humble ingredients. Leftover ham, often purchased as a marked-down end piece from the deli counter, was cubed and layered with thinly sliced potatoes in a deep skillet or baking dish. A simple white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk was poured over everything before the dish went into the oven to bake until the potatoes were tender and the top turned golden brown. The ham released its salty, smoky flavor into the creamy sauce while the potatoes absorbed everything, becoming impossibly rich and satisfying. A small ham piece and a few potatoes fed one senior for 3 or 4 meals, making it economical despite its indulgent taste. The dish required time in the oven but minimal hands-on effort, perfect for those who needed to rest while dinner cooked itself. Ham and scalloped potatoes represented the best of vintage cooking. Simple ingredients elevated through technique into something that felt like celebration. Creamed onions were the pearly white side dish that appeared in silver serving bowls at Christmas dinners across America, their mild sweetness balanced by rich bechamel. Small pearl onions were peeled by hand, a tedious job that left cooks weeping but yielded incomparable results. The onions were simmered until just tender, then folded into a sauce of butter, flour, cream, and sometimes a touch of nutmeg that coated each pearl in velvety richness. The finished dish looked almost like a dessert, the pale onions glistening in their creamy bath. Families passed the bowl around the table, spooning modest portions alongside roast beef or turkey. The flavor was subtle, the onions sweet and soft against the rich sauce. Making creamed onions from scratch required patience and skill, the sauce needing constant attention to prevent lumps. By the 1980s, frozen pearl onions and canned cream soups had replaced the handmade version, and eventually the dish vanished entirely from most Christmas tables. Number 17. Stuffed green peppers. You cut the tops off, scooped out the seeds, and filled each pepper with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, diced onion, and canned tomato sauce. Then you stood them upright in a baking dish, poured more tomato sauce around the base, and baked them for about 45 minutes until the peppers softened and the filling firmed up. The kitchen smelled like a church supper. Every pepper was its own self-contained dinner, neat and round and sitting in a pool of red sauce. Families in Ohio and Pennsylvania made these almost weekly because 1 pound of hamburger stretched across 6 peppers and fed the whole table. You did not need a side dish. The pepper was the bowl and the meal was inside it. Leftovers went into the refrigerator standing up, and the next day you reheated them in the oven, and they tasted even better because the rice had soaked up all the sauce overnight. Number 16. Fried potatoes and onions, a cast iron skillet, a spoonful of lard or bacon grease, and whatever potatoes you had on hand. You sliced them thin, layered them in the hot pan with sliced onions, and let them cook low and slow until the bottom layer went golden and crunchy. Flip the whole pile, season with salt and pepper, and wait again. That was the entire method. In Appalachia and across the rural South, fried potatoes and onions was the answer to the question of what to cook when the pantry was almost bare and payday was still 2 days away. A 10-pound bag of potatoes in 1958 stretched across 2 full weeks of dinners if you were careful with your knife. It was not exciting. It did not need to be. It was warm, and it was there. There is a particular kind of quiet in the kitchen of someone who cooks only for themselves. No children to call to the table, no spouse coming through the back door at 5:30. Just one plate, one glass, one fork laid down on the counter. Millions of American seniors eat alone every night, and many of the meals on this list were built for exactly that reality. Not portioned down from a family recipe, but designed from the ground up for one person, one appetite, and one burner on the stove. The sadness is not that they eat alone. The sadness is that so many stopped cooking altogether because someone told them it was not worth the effort for just one person. It is worth it. It always was. A pot of soup simmered for one is still a pot of soup made with care. Number 17. Bean soup with a ham bone. After the Sunday ham, the bone went straight into a pot of water with a bag of dried navy beans, a diced onion, a couple of carrots, and a bay leaf. You let it simmer on the back burner for most of the next day, adding water whenever it got too thick until the beans went creamy and the ham fell off the bone in soft shreds. That one ham bone produced 3 or 4 nights of soup for a family of 5 without a single trip to the store. The broth was smoky and rich. The beans were soft enough to dissolve on your tongue, and the little bits of ham scattered through every bowl gave each spoonful something to find. It tasted better on the second night, because the flavors kept deepening as it sat. Number 23 on this list is leather breeches beans. Green beans threaded on cotton string with a sewing needle, hung from a rafter in the back room in late August, and dried for 6 weeks until they rattle when the wind moves through the house. The whole place smelled like cured hay for the first week. By Christmas, a handful went into a pot with water, a pinch of salt, and a thumb of side meat, and they swelled back to something close to their summer selves. The flavor is concentrated, smoky, almost like a green raisin. Verley Greer kept a string of them on the porch beam every winter, and Foxfire interviewers found the same string in nearly every old kitchen they walked into through the 70s. For one bowl, a half cup of dried beans yields a full single supper. The technique itself is what is forgotten, not the bean. For 14, vinegar pie. You stirred half a cup of white vinegar into hot water, added a cup of sugar, 2 beaten eggs, 3 tablespoons of flour, a pat of butter, and a pinch of nutmeg. What came out of the oven tasted like a lemon meringue pie that had never seen a lemon. Vinegar pie traveled on wagon trains from Tennessee to Oregon and fed Laura Ingalls Wilder's family on the Dakota Prairie. The acid bit. The sugar covered it. The custard set in 25 minutes at 350. Your great-grandmother called it desperation pie. She made it on a Sunday when the preacher was coming. He asked for 2 slices, and the genius was the temperature of the water before the vinegar went in. The hot water dissolved the sugar all the way through, and only then did the cold acid hit, which kept the egg from scrambling on contact and gave the custard its silky texture. She brought the kettle to a near boil before she started. Number 17, macaroni and cheese from scratch. Kraft had introduced its boxed version in 1937 during the Depression and sold 8 million boxes in the first year at 19 cents each. By the 1950s, both versions existed side by side in the same kitchens. The scratch version was the one you made for company. Elbow macaroni, a white sauce of butter, flour, and milk, and 2 cups of real cheddar or Velveeta, which melted smoothly and did not break. You cooked it all in one pot. The whole dish cost about 55 cents from scratch, compared to 19 cents for the box. That gap told you everything about the decade. The housewife who served scratch macaroni and cheese to guests and Kraft on Tuesdays was performing a quiet negotiation about what kind of cook she was and what kind of evening this was going to be. The scratch chicken pot pie of the 1970s had 2 crusts, top and bottom, made from cold butter and a cream sauce filling built from a roux, not poured from a can. It took most of a Sunday afternoon. Bottom crust blind baked with dried bean weights, then the warm filling, then the top crust crimped and vented. 400 degrees, 35 minutes, until the steam lifted the center slightly and the edges went dark gold. The rule nobody wrote down. The filling had to go in warm. Put it in cold, and the bottom crust steamed instead of baked. and you knew by the sound when you cut through it. You learned by making a bad one first. By the late 1970s, the frozen version had claimed enough of the market that the homemade tradition started thinning. The women who knew the real method kept using it. When they stopped, the knowledge didn't transfer. Not because anyone refused, but because nobody asked in time. Navy bean and ham bone soup started the night before, always, because dried beans were not something you rushed. A pound of navy beans went into a pot covered with cold water and left on the counter overnight, swelling in the dark. The ham bone from Sunday went in the next morning with the soaked beans covered with fresh water, set on the back burner to simmer all day. No recipe, no ratio. You added an onion, a bay leaf, maybe a carrot if one was in the cold box. By 4 in the afternoon, the broth had gone deep and cloudy and the meat had come off the bone in long shreds. You fished out the bone, pulled the meat, stirred it back in, salted until it was right. Ham and bean soup was Monday in the South and Midwest for generations, built on the understanding that Sunday's celebration fed Tuesday's working week and that nothing left the kitchen until it had given everything it had. Tomato gravy started the same way sawmill gravy did. Bacon drippings in a hot skillet, a spoonful of flour stirred in. But where sawmill gravy reached for milk, tomato gravy reached for the canning jar. Home-canned tomatoes, crushed by hand into the roux, turned the gravy a deep orange red and gave it a sweetness that the pepper-heavy sawmill version never had. A pinch of sugar went in if the tomatoes were too sharp, and the gravy cooked down until it was thick enough to sit on a split biscuit without running off the edges. Across the rural South through the 1940s and 50s, tomato gravy was breakfast, served alongside whatever the kitchen could produce: eggs if the hens were laying, a slice of cured ham if the smokehouse still had one. The color told you what kind of morning it was. Pale gravy meant milk was plentiful. Red gravy meant the cow had gone dry and the tomatoes were filling in. Crackling cornbread with cane syrup was Christmas side that elevated simple cornbread into something rich and celebratory. The cracklings, crispy bits of rendered pork fat left from lard making, were mixed into cornbread batter before baking, creating pockets of crunchy, porky richness throughout. The bread baked in cast iron until crusty outside and tender inside, its top golden and inviting. Served with dark cane syrup drizzled over warm slices, this combined savory and sweet in ways that defined mountain eating. In rural communities, crackling cornbread meant using every part of the hog, transforming scraps into celebration. The cracklings added protein and flavor that plain cornbread lacked, while cane syrup provided sweetness families couldn't always afford. This was Christmas abundance created from what others might discard, proving mountain cooks knew how to make luxury from nothing. Buttered noodles satisfied hunger with the simplest combination of starch, fat, and salt, asking nothing of the cook beyond boiling water. Seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s kept boxes of egg noodles in their pantries for evenings when cooking felt like too much, but hunger insisted on attention. The noodles were boiled until tender, drained thoroughly, then returned to the warm pot where butter was added along with generous salt and pepper. The butter melted into warm pasta, coating each strand with glossy richness that tasted more indulgent than ingredients suggested. Some added dried parsley for color or grated cheese when budget allowed. The entire preparation took under 10 minutes and produced a bowl of comfort that filled empty stomachs without taxing limited energy. Buttered noodles were honest food that never pretended to be more than what they were. For seniors eating alone, this simple dish provided warmth on nights when elaborate cooking was impossible. Oxtail rice pilau carried African cooking traditions through generations of southern kitchens where nothing went to waste. Oxtails, once sold cheap to those who knew their value, were browned in a deep cast iron pot until caramelized, their collagen-rich meat promising silky richness after long cooking. Onions, tomatoes, and spices joined the pot before liquid was added, and everything simmered for hours. When meat began falling from vertebrae and cooking liquid had reduced to concentrated flavor, long-grain rice was stirred in to absorb every bit of goodness. The pilau finished covered, rice becoming tender while oxtails contributed gelatinous texture to bind everything together. This dish stretched protein across many plates, with rice carrying rich flavor far beyond what meat alone could provide. African American families perfected this technique, understanding that bones held as much value as flesh when cooked with patience. The dish showed how immigrant cooking traditions adapted to available ingredients. Tomato gravy over rice was Southern poverty food that generations of seniors relied upon when the pantry was nearly bare, but dinners still needed to happen. The gravy started with bacon drippings heated in a skillet, then flour was stirred in to create a roux that cooked until golden. Canned tomatoes were added along with water to create a gravy that was tangy, rich, and deeply comforting. Sugar balanced the acidity while salt and pepper brought everything into focus. Poured over a mound of white rice, this simple combination became a meal that satisfied hunger without straining the budget. A single can of tomatoes and a cup of rice fed one person for 2 days, making it one of the most economical dinners possible. The dish carried memories of harder times, of grandmothers who knew how to make something from nothing. For seniors eating alone, tomato gravy over rice was both nostalgia and nourishment in a single skillet, proof that comfort could be measured in the simplest ingredients prepared with care. Roast duck with orange sauce was the continental-inspired dish that sophisticated families served to demonstrate their worldly tastes. The duck was pricked all over to release fat, then roasted slowly until the skin turned impossibly crisp while the meat stayed moist. Orange sauce was made from scratch, combining fresh juice, zest, stock, and sometimes Grand Marnier into something bright that balanced the rich meat. The presentation was classic. Sliced duck breast fanned across plates, sauce drizzled artfully, orange segments providing color. This was aspirational cooking, inspired by French restaurants and Julia Child's television appearances. Duck required more skill than turkey or chicken, its higher fat content demanding different techniques. The dish represented cultural ambition, families embracing international cuisine as a mark of sophistication. Today, duck rarely appears on home Christmas tables, reserved for restaurants where few experience its former holiday glory. Number 18. Macaroni and tomatoes. You boiled elbow macaroni until it was soft, drained it, and stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes with all the juice, a pat of butter, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. That was the whole recipe. Some mothers added a handful of diced onion fried in the butter first. Others crumbled a few saltine crackers over the top. The dish came together in the time it took to boil water, and it tasted like something between a soup and a casserole. Warm and simple and slightly sweet from the tomatoes. This was the dinner nobody talked about because it barely qualified as cooking, but it showed up on tables across the Ohio Valley every single week. It was the filler meal, the one between grocery trips, the one that used two things every pantry already held. Number 17. Bean soup with a ham bone. After the Sunday ham, the bone went straight into a pot of water with a bag of dried navy beans, a diced onion, a couple of carrots, and a bay leaf. You let it simmer on the back burner for most of the next day, adding water whenever it got too thick until the beans went creamy and the ham fell off the bone in soft shreds. That one ham bone produced 3 or 4 nights of soup for a family of 5 without a single trip to the store. The broth was smoky and rich, the beans were soft enough to dissolve on your tongue, and the little bits of ham scattered through every bowl gave each spoonful something to find. It tasted better on the second night, because the flavors kept deepening as it sat. Number 16. Fried potatoes and onions, a cast iron skillet, a spoonful of lard or bacon grease, and whatever potatoes you had on hand. You sliced them thin, layered them in the hot pan with sliced onions, and let them cook low and slow until the bottom layer went golden and crunchy. Flip the whole pile, season with salt and pepper, and wait again. That was the entire method. In Appalachia and across the rural South, fried potatoes and onions was the answer to the question of what to cook when the pantry was almost bare and payday was still 2 days away. A 10-pound bag of potatoes in 1958 stretched across 2 full weeks of dinners if you were careful with your knife. It was not exciting. It did not need to be. It was warm, and it was there. There is a particular kind of quiet in the kitchen of someone who cooks only for themselves. No children to call to the table, no spouse coming through the back door at 5:30. Just one plate, one glass, one fork laid down on the counter. Millions of American seniors eat alone every night, and many of the meals on this list were built for exactly that reality. Not portioned down from a family recipe, but designed from the ground up for one person, one appetite, and one burner on the stove. The sadness is not that they eat alone. The sadness is that so many stopped cooking altogether because someone told them it was not worth the effort for just one person. It is worth it. It always was. A pot of soup simmered for one is still a pot of soup made with care. Number 19. Fatback and pintos. A square of cured fatback about 2 inches across rendered in a small, heavy skillet until it gives up its grease and turns into a brown crackling. The cracklings go on top of a bowl of plain pintos. The rendered grease goes into the bean jar for next week. Nothing wasted. The dish takes 10 minutes, and a single supper costs about 40 cents. A widow in Greene County, Tennessee, can finish the whole bowl with one biscuit on the side and call the kitchen closed for the night. The cracklings on top are what most of the family will reach for first. Number 15. Water pie. You whisked a cup and a half of water, a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 4 tablespoons of flour, and 4 pats of butter, then poured the lot into an unbaked shell. The first printed recipe ran in California in 1886, but the dish came back during the Depression when cooks had no eggs, no milk, and no excuse to skip dessert. The flour and the sugar set the water into a gelatinous custard in the oven, the butter floated to the top in beads of yellow, and the whole thing sliced clean once it cooled. Your great-grandmother served it at a wake in 1934 in West Virginia. Nobody knew it was made of water. They asked her for the recipe. She just smiled and lied. The chemistry is sugar binding water into syrup, then flour, gelating it into a sliceable solid past 200 degrees. You do not need to know any of that to bake one. You just need to trust the oven for 45 minutes and walk away. Number 16. Corned beef hash skillet. Hormel introduced Mary Kitchen canned corned beef hash around 1950. It became the #1 selling hash in America and has held that position ever since. The skillet technique was simple. You pressed the hash flat in a cast iron pan, let it form a dark brown crust on the bottom, flipped it in sections, and cracked 2 eggs over the top. 15 minutes. Under 55 cents. Corned beef hash was what veterans made. It required nothing perishable. It tasted like the Army, like the Navy, like basic training. In the early 1950s, with 16 million World War II veterans still in their 20s and 30s, this dish carried an emotional weight that went beyond the ingredients. It appeared on diner menus from Maine to California as a blue plate special for under $50. The rule was the recipe: 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, 1 envelope of dry onion soup mix, a cup of long grain rice, a cup and a half of water, chicken pieces on top, lid sealed with foil, 90 minutes at 350. Do not open it. Open the lid at 45 minutes and the steam escaped, the rice went dry, and you came back to something nobody wanted. The title was the entire instruction set, No Peak Chicken and Rice, and every cook who made it had a story about someone who peaked, told with the satisfaction of patience, vindicated. It spread through church cookbook fundraisers across the 1970s because it asked almost nothing and delivered every time. It is strange to explain to someone raised on instant read thermometers that a dish could require only restraint, and that restraint alone was sufficient. Porcupine meatballs earned their name honestly. Raw, long-grain rice pressed into the ground beef before cooking, so as the meatballs simmered, the grains pushed through the surface like quills, swelling as they absorbed the liquid. The idea came from the Depression, when families needed to stretch a pound of ground beef as far as possible. Rice doubled the volume of the meatballs and gave the dish a texture somehow better than plain beef. The rice absorbed the tomato sauce from the inside out, cooking in it rather than alongside it. Most families used a can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup thinned with water, which gave the sauce a sweetness that scratch tomato couldn't replicate. You dropped the raw meatballs into the simmering liquid without browning them first. That was the trick, the part that looked wrong to anyone who hadn't been taught. Browning first would have set the rice before it could expand. The kids who knew that were the ones whose grandmothers had made these during the Depression and never stopped. Cornmeal mush was exactly what it sounded like. Cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling water until it thickened into a dense, porridge-like mass. But the real meal came the next morning, when the leftover mush had been poured into a loaf pan and left to set firm in the cold. You sliced it thick, laid the slices in a skillet with hot grease, and fried them until both sides turned golden and crisp, while the center stayed soft and creamy. Cherokee communities had been cooking cornmeal this way long before German-American settlers in the Appalachian foothills adopted the technique, a practice that showed up in household records from Western Virginia and the Carolinas as far back as the 1700s. Topped with sorghum syrup or a drizzle of honey, fried mush was breakfast and supper depending on the household, and the overnight wait was the whole secret. Fresh mush fell apart in the skillet. You had to let the cold do the work. Patience was the ingredient that never made it into the recipe. Pickled beets and eggs were once a colorful sight on hillbilly Thanksgiving tables, glowing bright pink inside mason jars that sat proudly at the center of the spread. The beets gave everything a sweet earthiness, while the vinegar soaked deep into the eggs, turning them tangy and vibrant. Kids stared at them in fascination, adults reached for them with familiarity, and everyone knew exactly which aunt had brought the jar. This dish existed because nothing in a rural kitchen went to waste, especially at the end of harvest season when beets were plentiful and eggs still needed to be used. People kept jars ready weeks before Thanksgiving so the flavors could deepen, and when the holiday finally arrived, the first slice or spoonful tasted like effort rewarded. As store-bought sides became more common and fewer people kept pickling traditions alive, this once-beloved holiday treat slowly slipped away, but in some homes, a bright jar on the table still brings back memories of holidays filled with color and tang. Welsh rarebit in its quick version brought pub-style comfort to kitchen tables, requiring only cheese, milk, and toast to create something surprisingly sophisticated. Seniors who remembered this dish from earlier decades simplified the traditional recipe into something achievable in under 10 minutes. Sharp cheddar was grated and melted slowly in a small saucepan with a splash of milk, dash of Worcestershire sauce, and sometimes pinch of dry mustard. The mixture was stirred until smooth, then spooned generously over toast placed on a plate. The cheese sauce pooled around bread, creating a dish part soup and part sandwich, eaten with knife and fork. The flavors were bold and savory, the texture rich and comforting. For seniors eating alone, Welsh rarebit felt like treating yourself to something special without leaving home or spending much money. This dish transformed ordinary pantry ingredients into something that tasted like care and intention. Salt pork and potato skillet was the dish that fed families when nothing else remained in the cellar but preserved meat and root vegetables. Salt pork, heavily cured pork belly that kept for months without refrigeration, was sliced and fried in cast iron until it rendered crispy cracklings floating in pure white fat. Thick sliced potatoes went into that fat, absorbing salty richness as they fried until edges turned golden and centers became creamy. Onions were often added for sweetness, and the whole skillet came to the table still sizzling. The dish required no fresh ingredients, nothing that couldn't survive winter in a root cellar. Families during lean times knew they could always manage if they had salt pork put away and potatoes stored in sand. The meal provided fat for energy, carbohydrates for fuel, and enough salt to keep bodies working through hard physical labor. This wasn't fancy eating. It was survival food that happened to taste like comfort itself. Bean and bacon simmer was the kind of slow-cooked meal that filled small homes with warmth and the promise of something good waiting on the stove. Dried beans cost pennies per pound and provided protein that rivaled meat at a fraction of the price. Seniors would sort through the beans each morning, cover them with water, and let them soak while going about their day. By evening, the beans were ready to simmer with a few strips of bacon, diced onion, and enough water to cover everything by an inch. Hours of gentle cooking transformed the hard beans into creamy, tender morsels while the bacon infused the liquid with smoky richness. A single pound of dried beans created enough food to last nearly a week when portioned carefully. The cooking liquid itself became a treasure, thick with flavor and nutrients that could be sipped like broth or used to moisten cornbread. This wasn't a meal that happened quickly, but for seniors with time and little money, bean and bacon simmer provided security in every spoonful. Seafood. Newburgh was the luxurious first course that opened Christmas dinner with creamy richness and delicate shellfish. Lobster, shrimp, and sometimes crab meat were gently folded into a sauce of butter, cream, egg yolks, and sherry, the mixture served over toast points or in patty shells. The sauce was velvety and rich, coating each piece of seafood in decadent luxury that justified its holiday placement. Making Newburgh required careful technique. The egg yolks could curdle if the sauce got too hot, ruining everything. Families served this as a first course before the main roast, a statement of abundance and sophistication. The dish came from Delmonico's restaurant in New York, spreading to home kitchens where ambitious cooks recreated its elegance. Seafood Newburgh represented the era's formal dining culture, when Christmas dinner was multiple courses served with ceremony. It has largely vanished, replaced by simpler appetizers that don't require last-minute sauce making. Number 16. Tamale pie. This was not a tamale, and it was not really a pie. But nobody cared what you called it, because it disappeared from the dish before you could argue about the name. You browned ground beef with onion and chili powder, stirred in canned tomatoes and a handful of sliced black olives, and poured it into a casserole dish. Then you spread a thick layer of cornmeal batter over the top and baked it until the crust turned golden and pulled away from the edges. The cornmeal top cracked when you cut into it, and underneath was a thick, spicy, meaty filling that tasted like a tamale without any of the work. Church cookbooks across the Southwest printed this recipe so often the pages were stained with grease. One dish, one oven, no rolling corn husks, no steaming for hours. It was the shortcut that actually worked. Number 15. Buttered egg noodles. A bag of wide egg noodles boiled until soft, drained in a colander, and tossed back in the pot with a generous lump of real butter, salt, and black pepper. That was the entire meal. Sometimes you stirred in a handful of frozen peas or a spoonful of sour cream, but the plain version was what children in the 1970s actually asked for by name. Egg noodles cost less than spaghetti at most grocery stores, and a single bag filled 4 bowls without complaint. The texture was softer and richer than regular pasta because of the egg in the dough, and the melted butter clung to every wide strand in a way that margarine never could quite manage. This was the dinner mothers made on nights when nobody felt like cooking, but everyone still felt like eating. Number 15. Buttered egg noodles. A bag of wide egg noodles boiled until soft, drained in a colander, and tossed back in the pot with a generous lump of real butter, salt, and black pepper. That was the entire meal. Sometimes you stirred in a handful of frozen peas or a spoonful of sour cream, but the plain version was what children in the 1970s actually asked for by name. Egg noodles cost less than spaghetti at most grocery stores, and a single bag filled 4 bowls without complaint. The texture was softer and richer than regular pasta because of the egg in the dough, and the melted butter clung to every wide strand in a way that margarine never could quite manage. This was the dinner mothers made on nights when nobody felt like cooking, but everyone still felt like eating. Number 18 is chicken and dumplings from a single hen. A whole stewing hen poached in salted water with a celery rib and an onion until the meat falls off the bone. Strip the bird, roll out flat dumplings the thickness of a nickel, cut them into squares with a butter knife, and drop them into the broth one at a time so they cook through without sticking. One hen yields 4 single suppers, and the remaining dumplings freeze in pint jars for the next 2 lunches. Mountain families did not waste a bird, and the modern freezer-to-bowl version of this dish is closer to what an Appalachian widow always did than to anything in a chain restaurant. The broth itself becomes a thermos of warmth the next morning. Number 13. Poor man's meal of hot dogs and potatoes. You diced 4 potatoes, fried them in bacon grease until brown, threw in half a chopped onion, then sliced 4 hot dogs into coins for the last 6 minutes. Salt, pepper, a glug of ketchup on the side of the plate. That was supper in a coal camp in 1937, in a Bakersfield trailer in 1981, and in a kitchen in Ohio tonight. The dish has no recipe card. It is the working family's reflex meal, the one a man cooks when his wife is at the late shift. It costs about $3 to make today. It costs nothing to remember. Both are true at once. The order matters more than the recipe. Potatoes first, all the way to a deep brown crust, then the onion for sweetness, and the hot dogs only at the very end so the casing split and rendered their own fat into the pan. Number 15. Chicken fricassee. The dish had been in American cookbooks since the 18th century. Mary Randolph published a version in the Virginia Housewife in 1824. By the 1950s, convenience food had changed it completely. Poppy Cannon's Can Opener Cookbook in 1953 reduced the recipe to a single instruction: open a can. The home version was not much harder. You browned chicken pieces in a Dutch oven, added a can of cream of chicken soup, sliced mushrooms, onion, celery, and a splash of white wine. You covered it and simmered for 45 minutes. The whole meal cost about $1.20. Chicken fricassee had a French name. In the 1950s, that alone elevated a Tuesday dinner into something that felt like you were trying. Most women in America were making it from a can of soup. Nobody talked about that part. The name did the work. It made a 10-cent can of soup taste like ambition. Tamale pie was the American suburbs translation of a dish that required community and skill. Masa ground fresh, corn husks soaked soft, hands that had learned the right pressure. The translation discarded all of that and replaced it with something a 1970s kitchen could manage on a Wednesday. Ground beef with chili powder and cumin, corn and canned tomatoes, covered with a thick cornmeal batter and baked at 375 until the topping cracked gold. The result was genuinely good. Smoky, slightly sweet, the seasoned beef working up through the crust. What it couldn't carry was the labor the original required. The communal process, the technique learned by watching, not reading, the lard and fresh masa that no shelf staple could replace. Tamale pie appeared in 1972 dinner party menus, alongside sukiyaki and stuffed cabbage as a peer. It faded with the casserole era in the 80s. The tradition it borrowed from never needed to fade, and didn't. Sunday spaghetti in American kitchens had almost nothing to do with Italy and everything to do with what happened to Italian cooking when it crossed the ocean and hit a country where beef was cheap and tomatoes came in cans. Italian immigrants had made their Sunday gravy with pork bones and sausage, a long simmered sauce that took most of the day. By the 1950s, when the sauce had spread to non-Italian households through neighborhoods and church friends and the back of the Hunt's tomato can, the pork bones had been replaced with ground beef browned in a skillet and stirred directly in. It still simmered for hours. That part wasn't negotiable. You started it after lunch on Sunday and let it go until supper, the whole house filling with the smell of tomatoes cooking down into something deep and almost sweet. Served over spaghetti with a piece of white bread to push things around the plate, it fed 6 people on 2 pounds of meat and a few cans of tomatoes. The sauce always tasted better the next day. Everyone knew that. Nobody waited. The sound came first, a sharp hiss when hot bacon grease hit raw greens, and then the smell of vinegar rising in a cloud of steam that filled the kitchen before the plate reached the table. Kilt lettuce, sometimes called killed lettuce, was the Appalachian way of turning raw leaf lettuce into something warm and wilted and dressed all at once. You picked the lettuce fresh from the garden, leaf lettuce, never iceberg, piled it in a bowl, and poured a hot dressing of bacon grease, apple cider vinegar, and a pinch of sugar directly over the raw leaves. The heat wilted them instantly, and you ate it before it cooled, because kilt lettuce that sat too long turned limp and sad. The window between too small and too bitter lasted only a few weeks. You didn't need a calendar. The lettuce told you when it was ready. Glass egg preservation allowed families to store eggs for months without refrigeration, by submerging them in sodium silicate solution that sealed the porous shells completely. This technique, passed through generations of mountain women, kept eggs fresh from spring laying season through winter scarcity when hens stopped producing. Modern food scientists confirm that water glass creates an airtight barrier preventing bacterial contamination and moisture loss while maintaining quality for 6 months or longer. The eggs emerged from their mineral bath looking identical to fresh ones, with yolks standing high and whites holding firm. Commercial facilities now use similar principles, but the chemistry remains what farm wives discovered through necessity. Families practicing this technique never faced winter without eggs for baking or breakfast. The method required no refrigeration, no special equipment beyond a crock, and no ongoing attention. Cinnamon toast delivered sweetness and warmth in under 5 minutes, becoming the default supper for seniors who craved comfort without complexity. The preparation was almost meditative. Bread was toasted until golden, then spread immediately with soft butter that melted into the warm surface. Sugar and cinnamon, pre-mixed in small jars kept near the stove, were sprinkled generously over the buttered surface. The heat caused the sugar to dissolve slightly, creating a thin, sweet crust that crackled between teeth. Some seniors placed their cinnamon toast under the broiler to caramelize the topping into something approaching candy. The aroma alone lifted spirits on difficult evenings. This was comfort food in its purest form, requiring nothing fancy and delivering everything needed. For widows and widowers eating alone during the 1950s and 60s, cinnamon toast meant dessert and dinner combined into one affordable, satisfying meal that tasted like childhood remembered. Neck bones and rice was the Monday dinner in countless Southern households, a tradition born from economic necessity and perfected through generations of careful seasoning. Pork neck bones, sold cheap because they required work to eat, were browned in a deep skillet, their exposed marrow and cartilage promising richness no other cut could deliver. Onions, garlic, and seasonings joined before liquid was added, and the pot was covered for long simmering. When meat had loosened from bones and cooking liquid reduced to concentrated flavor, rice was stirred in to absorb every bit of goodness. The finished dish was eaten with fingers and spoons. Neck bones required picking, the meat hidden in crevices that rewarded patience. Children learned early that the sweetest meat lived closest to the bone. This dish cost almost nothing but fed families completely, the rice stretching rich pork flavor across plates that satisfied without requiring expensive cuts. Chili mac skillet was comfort food that came together in a single pan and satisfied cravings for something hearty and warming. Ground beef was browned with onions, then chili powder, cumin, and a can of tomatoes transformed the mixture into something boldly flavored. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the skillet, along with enough water to cook the pasta, and the whole thing simmered until the noodles were tender and had absorbed the spiced tomato liquid. Shredded cheese melted over the top created strings of gooey richness that made each bite feel indulgent. The dish was adaptable. Kidney beans could be added for extra protein, corn for sweetness, or extra chili powder for those who liked heat. A single skillet of chili mac fed one person for 3 meals, making it both economical and practical for seniors living alone. The combination of protein, carbohydrates, and vegetables in one dish meant balanced nutrition without preparing multiple components. Chili mac was honest, filling, and exactly what a cold evening demanded. Chestnut stuffing was the old-fashioned filling that connected American Christmas to European traditions, its sweet nuttiness complementing roast poultry perfectly. Fresh chestnuts were scored, roasted until the shells split, then peeled. A labor-intensive process that took hours but yielded incomparable flavor. The peeled chestnuts were crumbled and mixed with bread cubes, sausage, onions, and herbs, the mixture moistened with stock. The texture was substantial, the chestnuts adding richness that dried bread alone couldn't provide. Families with European heritage maintained this tradition, passing down techniques for the temperamental nuts. Fresh chestnuts were available only seasonally, sold by street vendors who knew their customers waited all year. This stuffing has nearly disappeared, replaced by packaged versions that can't match the original. The labor required, and the disappearance of fresh chestnut vendors, ended a tradition that once defined Christmas flavor. Number 15. Ham and lima bean casserole. Leftover ham cut into cubes, frozen lima beans, and a can of cream of mushroom soup. You mixed everything together in a baking dish, topped it with buttered breadcrumbs, and baked it until the edges bubbled. The mushroom soup was the sauce, which meant you did not need to make a roux or measure anything beyond opening a can. Lima beans were everywhere in the 1950s. They showed up in casseroles, soups, and side dishes because they were cheap and available frozen year-round. Most children hated them. Most mothers served them anyway. This casserole was the dinner nobody asked for and nobody complained about. It filled the plate, it used up the ham, and it was done in 40 minutes. By the late 1950s, frozen dinners started showing up in grocery stores, and the promise was hard to resist. A full meal on a tray, ready in 20 minutes, no planning required. Swanson put a turkey dinner in an aluminum tray and called it a television dinner, and within a few years, the entire idea of cooking from scratch on a weeknight started to feel old-fashioned. The meals on this list did not disappear because they tasted bad. They disappeared because they took time, and time was the one thing the modern kitchen was designed to eliminate. A casserole that baked for an hour lost to a tray that heated in 20 minutes. A soup that simmered all afternoon lost to a can that opened in 2 seconds. The trade was speed for flavor, and most families made it without looking back. What they gave up was not just a recipe. It was the smell of a kitchen that had been working all day. Number 14. Chicken and dumplings. This was the meal that turned one chicken into a feast, and the women who made it could stretch a single bird across 2 full days without anyone feeling shortchanged. You started with a whole fryer, the cheapest one in the store, and simmered it in a big pot of salted water with celery, onion, and a few peppercorns until the meat was tender enough to fall away from the bone. Then you pulled the bird out, stripped every last bit of meat off the carcass with your fingers, and dropped the bones back in the broth for another 20 minutes of flavor. The dumplings were simple. Flour, baking powder, a little salt, and enough buttermilk to make a thick, sticky batter. You dropped spoonfuls of it straight into the simmering broth, clamped the lid on tight, and did not touch it for 15 minutes. When you lifted the lid, the dumplings had puffed up into soft white pillows floating in a broth that had gone thick and cloudy from the starch. You stirred the shredded chicken back in and ladled it into deep bowls. In the mountains of western North Carolina, churchwomen made chicken and dumplings for every funeral, every homecoming, and every evening when someone in the community simply needed feeding. 1 chicken, a cup of flour, and an hour of patience fed 10 people. The leftovers went into mason jars that showed up on a neighbor's porch the next morning without a note attached. It was never really about the chicken. It was about turning almost nothing into something warm enough to carry across the road to someone who needed it. Number 17. Ramps and scrambled eggs. Ramps are the wild leeks that come up in the holler hardwood every March, and they have a smell that lingers on a kitchen for 2 days. A half dozen ramps chopped fine, sweated in bacon grease for 2 minutes, then 2 beaten eggs scrambled in slow until they just set. A piece of buttered toast underneath. The supper takes 4 minutes, and the ramps are free for anyone who knows where to find them. Hill families in Madison County and across the Smokies built the spring around this meal, and the annual ramp festivals in Cosby and White Top still draw families that have gathered the same patches for 4 generations. For 1 plate, a half handful of ramps is plenty, and the smell tells the neighbors what was for supper without anyone having to say. Number 12. Hoe cakes with sorghum. You whisked a cup of cornmeal, half a cup of buttermilk, a beaten egg, salt, and a tablespoon of bacon grease, and spooned it into hot cast iron in palm-sized rounds. The name comes from the iron blade of a garden hoe, which freed slaves and sharecroppers used as a griddle over an open fire when there was no proper pan in the cabin. The Cherokee taught it to the colonists. Black families in South Carolina made hoe cakes a quiet act of survival through the Jim Crow century. You eat them with sorghum poured straight on top. They cost pennies. They are, by every honest measure, ancestral food. The genius was the bacon grease in the batter itself. A tablespoon of rendered fat made the hoe cakes brown the way a real pancake brown does, and the salt from the cured pork seasoned the corn from the inside. Without the grease, the cakes were chalky. With it, they tasted like the breakfast stove. Number 14. Sloppy Joes. The origin story splits between two places: Sioux City, Iowa, 1926, where a cook named Joe at Floyd Angel's Cafe added tomato sauce to loose meat sandwiches, and Havana, Cuba, where a bar owner named Sloppy Joe Abial y Otero served ground beef sandwiches as early as 1917. By the 1950s, the name was everywhere, and the dish was in every school cafeteria in America. There was no manwich yet. That canned sauce did not arrive until 1969, made by Hunt's. In the 1950s, you made it from scratch. 1 pound of ground beef at 45 cents, an onion, ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, a tablespoon of brown sugar. You browned the meat, added the sauce, simmered it for 10 minutes, and spooned it onto hamburger buns that cost 20 cents a bag. The whole meal for a family of 4 cost under 90 cents. The beauty of a Sloppy Joe was that it solved the central problem of the 1950s kitchen. You had 1 pound of ground beef. You had 5 or 6 mouths to feed. You needed a way to make that single pound stretch across every plate and still feel like a real meal, not a compromise. The tomato sauce did the work. It turned a 1/4 pound of beef per person into a full sandwich that dripped down your wrists and stained your shirt and made children feel like they were eating something generous. In Topeka, Kansas, a school cafeteria cook named Betty Simmons served Sloppy Joes to 400 children every Wednesday for 12 years. She used 10 pounds of beef and 5 bottles of ketchup. The children lined up twice. She never ran out. That was the trick of the whole decade. Not the food itself, but the feeling it created. Abundance was a performance, and the best cooks in America knew exactly how to stage it from a 45-cent pound of ground beef and a squeeze of ketchup. European immigrants brought stuffed cabbage to American kitchens in the late 19th century, from Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, and the recipes differed by village and by family. The Hungarian version called for a touch of sugar in the tomato sauce. The Polish sometimes layered sauerkraut beneath the rolls before braising. What all versions shared was the method: a whole head of cabbage into boiling water, outer leaves peeled off one at a time as they softened, each packed with ground beef, raw rice, and onion, tucked and rolled firm. Seam down in a pot, covered in tomato sauce, 2 hours low. The house took on the smell of cabbage softening in tomato. Sweet and slightly funky, a smell that places you in that specific kitchen the moment you encounter it again, decades later. She knew they were done by pressing one roll with the back of a spoon and reading what she felt there. That knowledge existed nowhere on paper. The rolls stopped coming to family tables one generation at a time, the first losing patience for the rolling, the second not knowing the rolling had ever been something to lose. Before any family had a recipe for it, there were other kitchens, immigrant kitchens in Chicago and Detroit and Pittsburgh, where dinner was assembled from memory carried across an ocean. Stuffed cabbage rolls, which Polish families called golubki and Ukrainian families called holubtsi, and Czech families called holubki, came to American industrial cities with Central European immigrants in the late 1800s. Cabbage leaves softened in boiling water until pliable, filled with ground beef and raw rice, rolled tight, layered in a heavy pot, covered with tomato sauce, and left to braise for hours. The rice cooked inside the rolls, absorbing the sauce, pushing the meat outward until each roll was firm and sliceable. The rolls on the bottom of the pot got the most caramelization from the sauce, and those were the ones everyone quietly tried to claim. If you got the bottom rolls, you didn't say anything. You just knew. When the nearest ocean was 500 miles away and fresh fish meant a creek full of catfish you didn't have time to catch, canned salmon was the answer. Salmon patties, canned salmon mixed with egg, cracker crumbs, and chopped onion, shaped into rounds and fried in a skillet, showed up on Friday supper tables across Appalachia and the rural South every week for decades. During the 1930s and 40s, a can of pink salmon cost less than 15 cents and provided enough protein to stretch across 2 meals for a family of 4. Coal mining families in West Virginia and eastern Kentucky relied on them because the company store stocked canned goods but rarely fresh meat. The patties fried best in a well-seasoned cast-iron skillet with enough grease to come halfway up the sides, and you pressed them thin so the edges went crisp while the center stayed moist. The smell of canned salmon frying on a Friday evening was so specific to these kitchens that catching a trace of it decades later could stop you cold in a grocery aisle. Corn pone was a dish tied directly to survival. A cornbread stripped of luxury and made with nothing but cornmeal, water, and salt. Unlike cornbread enriched with milk, eggs, or sugar, corn pone was dense, chewy, and often cooked in a skillet or even on hot stones near a fire. It was the food of farmers, laborers, and families with little more than a sack of cornmeal to last the week. Despite its simplicity, corn pone carried dignity because it kept people alive during lean years. It was eaten plain, with beans, or crumbled into milk or pot liquor for extra nourishment. Children grew up on it, and older generations remembered it as a symbol of persistence when choices were scarce. Though not glamorous, it filled stomachs and carried people through desperate times. As prosperity grew, corn pone was replaced by softer, sweeter breads, leaving it nearly forgotten. Yet its legacy remains in the memory of grandparents who knew its importance. Corn pone tells the story of survival through simplicity, a dish that gave strength when little else could. Peanut butter on crackers provided complete protein and staying power without requiring a single pot or pan. Seniors living on fixed incomes during the 1960s and 70s kept jars of peanut butter in their pantries as insurance against hunger. Saltines, graham crackers, or Ritz crackers served as the canvas for this thick, sticky spread that required some effort to eat, but rewarded patience with satisfaction. The peanut butter could be spread thin for economy, or thick for indulgence depending on the day's mood and the jar's remaining contents. Some seniors drizzled honey over their peanut butter crackers, or added sliced banana when fruit was available. The combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrate kept blood sugar stable through long evenings. This meal required no cooking, no cleanup beyond a knife wiped clean, and no particular skill. Peanut butter on crackers represented pure practicality, transformed into genuine sustenance for people who understood that simple did not mean inadequate. Salmon croquettes and fried potatoes was the Friday night dinner that stretched a single can of fish into a meal for the whole family. Canned salmon, bones, skin, and all, was mashed with egg, cracker crumbs, and onion, then formed into patties that fried in cast iron until golden and crispy outside while staying moist within. The same skillet held sliced potatoes that cooked in the remaining oil, absorbing the salmon's richness while developing caramelized edges. For Catholic families observing meatless Fridays, this was the answer that satisfied without breaking religious rules or household budgets. Canned salmon cost pennies and kept indefinitely on pantry shelves, making it reliable protein that didn't require refrigeration. The croquettes were served hot from the skillet alongside the potatoes, often with a squeeze of lemon or splash of hot sauce. Children who grew up with this dish remember the satisfying crunch giving way to tender, flavorful fish inside. One can, one skillet, and everyone ate well. Smothered cube steak was the working person's answer to fancy beef dishes, turning a cheap, tough cut into something fork-tender and swimming in rich brown gravy. Cube steak cost a fraction of better cuts because the butcher had already tenderized it by running it through a machine that broke down the tough fibers. Seniors would season the steak, dredge it in flour, and brown it quickly in a hot skillet before adding sliced onions and enough water to create a braising liquid. Covered and cooked low and slow, the meat became impossibly tender, while the flour coating dissolved into the liquid, creating gravy without extra effort. The onions melted into sweet strands that draped over the meat like silk. A single cube steak served over rice or mashed potatoes fed one person generously, with the gravy stretching the meal further. The dish required patience but rewarded it with flavors that belied its humble origins. Smothered cube steak proved that cheap cuts simply needed time and technique to become something satisfying. Plum pudding with hard sauce was the English tradition that concluded Christmas dinner with theatrical flames and boozy richness. The pudding itself was made weeks in advance, a dense mixture of sweet, dried fruits, spices, and breadcrumbs that aged until the flavors melded into something complex and deeply satisfying. On Christmas Day, the pudding was steamed for hours, then turned onto a platter and doused with brandy that was set alight, the blue flames dancing across its dark surface while guests applauded. Hard sauce, butter creamed with powdered sugar and more brandy, melted over hot slices, adding richness to every bite. Finding the hidden coin or charm baked inside brought luck to the finder. Families with English roots maintained this tradition for generations, the pudding recipe handed down carefully. The labor required and changing tastes that favored lighter desserts eventually ended the tradition for most families. Plum pudding represented a Christmas that demanded effort and rewarded patience. Number 14. Swiss steak. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from the technique of Swissing, an old textile term for running fabric through heavy rollers to flatten and smooth it. That was exactly what you did to the meat. You took a cheap, tough cut of round steak, laid it on a board, and pounded it with a meat mallet until the fibers broke down and the flour you pressed into both sides worked its way deep into the grain. Then you browned it hard in a hot skillet, laid it in a baking dish, covered it with canned tomatoes, sliced onions, and sometimes a diced green pepper, and baked it for 2 hours or more. The pounding and the long braising did what money could not. They turned a cut of beef that would have been too tough to chew into something tender enough to pull apart with the side of a fork. This was the meal families cooked when beef was on the table, but the budget only stretched to the cheapest piece in the case. The tomato sauce thickened around the meat as it baked, and by the time you pulled the dish out, the kitchen smelled like something slow and honest. You served it with mashed potatoes and poured the thick tomato pan sauce over everything on the plate. Swiss steak was one of the most common weeknight dinners in America for decades. It appeared in community cookbooks from coast to coast, and church suppers built whole menus around it. Today, most people under 50 have never heard the name. Number 13. Spam and rice. Hormel introduced spam in 1937, and by the time the war ended, it had found a permanent home in American kitchens that had nothing to do with the military. You sliced it thick, fried it in a skillet until the edges caramelized, and laid it over a mound of white rice with a fried egg on top or a splash of soy sauce. In Hawaii and across the Pacific states, spam and rice became a genuine cultural staple, but it was just as common in trailer parks and small apartments on the mainland where 1 can and a cup of dry rice fed 2 adults for under half a dollar. The sodium was enormous. Nobody cared. It was hot, filling, and a 12-ounce can sat in your cupboard for years without spoiling. That kind of reliability mattered when the paycheck was not. Number 12. Leftover hash. Whatever meat sat in the refrigerator from last night's dinner got chopped into rough cubes with cold boiled potatoes, diced onion, and a little bell pepper, then fried together in a cast iron skillet with enough bacon grease to build a proper crust on the bottom. Hash was not a recipe, it was a strategy. Roast beef hash, corned beef hash, ham hash from the Sunday leftovers. The whole skill was in that golden brown layer on the bottom of the pan, and getting it right took patience and a stubborn refusal to stir too early. A fried egg cracked on top was optional but strongly encouraged. Families in the 1950s ate hash at least once a week, and nobody ever called it leftovers when the children asked what was for dinner. Number 15. Salt pork gravy on hoe cake. A small piece of cured salt pork rendered in a skillet. The crackling set aside, the grease left in the pan. A spoon of flour stirred in, a half cup of water added slowly, salt, and a turn of black pepper. The gravy is gray and savory, and the cracklings go back in at the end as little brown chips on top. A hoe cake from number 24 sits underneath. The dish has fed Appalachian households since the 1800s, and for one person at a single chair, the whole supper takes 12 minutes and uses 1 pan. The salt pork itself keeps in a cool pantry for 2 months. Number 11. Cornmeal mush fried in lard. You stirred a cup of yellow cornmeal into 4 cups of boiling salted water, cooked it 15 minutes until it pulled from the sides, poured it into a loaf pan, and cooled it overnight in the icebox. The next morning, you sliced it half an inch thick, fried the slices in a tablespoon of lard until the outside was a dark mahogany crust, and ate them with butter, sorghum, or a fried egg on top. Your grandfather grew up on this in Pennsylvania Dutch country in the 1920s, and so did half of the Midwest. 1 pound of cornmeal cost 6 cents in 1932 and fed 6 for 2 days. The genius is the pause. You cook it once and eat it 3 different ways across 2 days. Fewer dishes, less wood, more meals. And the cooling step was non-negotiable. A warm slab turned to pudding. A cold one held its shape like a Tuscan polenta cake. Number 13, salmon patties. In the southern states, canned salmon was one of the cheapest protein sources you could buy. Pink salmon cost about 28 cents a can. The Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina, identified salmon patties as a defining dish of the southern working-class table. You drained a can of salmon, mixed it with an egg and crushed saltine crackers, formed patties, and fried them in bacon grease in a cast-iron skillet. 4 minutes per side. The whole meal cost about 45 cents. In Catholic households across the North, salmon patties were Friday food, the same as creamed tuna. For first-generation Jewish families in northern cities, canned salmon was both economical and kosher. A single tin and a handful of crackers stretched into dinner for 6. Your grandmother fried them until the edges were dark and crisp. She served them with lemon wedges and white bread. That was the whole plate. Nobody called it gourmet. Nobody needed to. Chicken paprikash arrived through Hungarian immigration and held on for 60 years because it rewarded patience and real ingredients. Bone-in chicken, sweet Hungarian paprika, vivid, almost orange, with a faint sweetness impossible to replicate from the dusty supermarket tin. Butter, onion, sour cream, and nothing else that mattered. 2 heaping tablespoons of paprika into softened butter and onion, stirred until the kitchen changed, then the chicken, broth, lid on, 45 minutes low. The sour cream went in off the heat at the very end, always off the heat, because if it boiled, the sauce broke into something grainy with no recovery. Over wide egg noodles, the color of a late sunset. A Taste of Home recipe credits a grandmother named Alta, whose version used only 5 ingredients, trusting the paprika entirely. It held up. The dish has thinned from general awareness now, but anyone whose grandmother made it will stop mid-step when that specific smell moves through a room. Paprika bloomed in butter, sour cream finishing the pan, and be completely somewhere else for a moment. City chicken had no chicken in it, which was the whole point of the name. In Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Detroit, in the Polish and Ukrainian neighborhoods that grew up around the steel mills in the 1930s and 40s, fresh chicken cost more per pound than pork shoulder or veal. So butcher counters in those neighborhoods sold cubed pork and veal already threaded on wooden skewers, shaped roughly to resemble a drumstick, and working families took them home, breaded them in seasoned flour and egg and breadcrumbs, browned them in a skillet, then finished them covered in the oven with a little broth. The imitation that tasted good enough that people stopped thinking of it as imitation. By the 1950s, it appeared in junior league cookbooks from Pennsylvania to Illinois under its real name, no longer embarrassed by its origins. The pork stayed juicy under the breading. The veal, when you could find it, went silky at the center. You pulled it off the stick with your teeth, and nobody called it anything other than dinner. If salmon patties came from a factory can, leather breeches came from the porch ceiling. Whole green beans, strung on thread and hung to dry in the open air until they shriveled into tough, leathery strips that could last through an entire winter without refrigeration. The Cherokee had been drying beans on rawhide cord for centuries before Appalachian settlers adopted the practice and renamed them leather breeches for the way the dried pods looked like miniature trouser legs. You rehydrated them by soaking overnight, then simmered them low and slow with a piece of salt pork or a ham hock until the beans softened and the broth turned dark and smoky. Some mountain families called them shucky beans. Same method, different hollow, different name for the same memory. The dried beans developed a concentrated, almost umami depth that fresh green beans could never match, and the old women who strung them every August swore the flavor came from the mountain air itself. Nobody strings leather breeches on the porch anymore. The taste of slow-dried August is gone with the hands that hung them. Hog Killing Day was the most important day on the mountain calendar. The first hard freeze of late autumn when families gathered before dawn to slaughter, butcher, and preserve every part of the pig that could be salted, smoked, or rendered. Chestnut soup with bacon was Christmas' first course that captured forest bounty and smokehouse richness. Wild chestnuts gathered in fall were roasted, peeled, and simmered until soft enough to puree. The resulting soup was thickened with cream when available, or milk when not, creating velvety texture. Crispy bacon crumbled on top added saltiness and crunch that complemented chestnut sweetness. In Appalachian communities, chestnut soup represented Christmas before the blight destroyed American chestnuts, marking this as truly forgotten food. The soup was elegant despite humble ingredients, its nutty sweetness unlike anything modern. Served hot in bowls, it warmed bodies preparing for larger Christmas meal to follow. The bacon provided savory contrast while adding necessary fat. This was mountain sophistication, wild food prepared with technique that created restaurant-quality results, proving rural cooks understood refinement even when cooking from forest and farm. Hot cereal with butter transformed humble oatmeal or cream of wheat into something almost luxurious on cold evenings. Seniors who grew up during the Depression understood that hot cereal stretched further than almost any other food, filling stomachs for pennies per serving. The cereal was cooked according to package directions, usually with water when milk needed stretching, then transferred to a bowl where a generous pat of butter was added along with salt, rather than sugar. The butter melted into golden pools on the surface, adding richness that made plain grain taste almost decadent. Some seniors stirred everything together while others let the butter remain in patches, each spoonful offering different proportions of creamy and plain. This savory preparation was common among those who preferred evening meals without sweetness. Hot cereal with butter represented economy and comfort combined, asking almost nothing of the cook while delivering warmth on evenings when loneliness felt sharpest. Tripe and onions turned the least glamorous part of the cow into something surprisingly delicate and satisfying. Tripe, the honeycomb-textured stomach lining, required hours of cleaning and simmering before it became tender enough to eat. Once prepared, the tripe was sliced thin and cooked in a cast-iron skillet with abundant onions, butter, and milk until everything melded into a creamy, rich dish. The texture was unlike anything else, slightly chewy but yielding, with a mild flavor that absorbed the sweetness of slow-cooked onions. Working-class families valued tripe because butchers practically gave it away, considering it waste. Those who knew how to prepare it understood they were getting genuine protein for almost nothing. The dish appeared regularly in immigrant communities where nose-to-tail eating was simply how things were done. Served over toast or with crusty bread to soak up the creamy sauce, tripe and onions provided comfort that cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction that rivaled expensive cuts. Spanish rice with ground beef was a one-skillet wonder that brought bold, tomatoey flavor to tables across America during the mid-20th century. A quarter pound of ground beef was browned with diced onion and green pepper until fragrant, then rice was added directly to the skillet and toasted until it turned slightly golden. Canned tomatoes, water, and a generous shake of chili powder transformed the mixture into something vibrant and satisfying. The rice absorbed the spiced tomato liquid as it cooked, each grain taking on a reddish hue and robust flavor. Some added a splash of Worcestershire sauce or a pinch of cumin for extra depth. The dish came together in under 30 minutes and required only a single pan, making cleanup simple for those living alone. One skillet of Spanish rice fed a senior for 2 or 3 meals, providing protein, carbohydrates, and vegetables in every serving. The bold flavors made it feel special despite costing mere pennies to prepare, proving that budget cooking could still deliver excitement. Ambrosia salad was the fluffy, sweet concoction that straddled the line between side dish and dessert, its marshmallows and coconut creating something uniquely American. Canned mandarin oranges, Pineapple chunks and maraschino cherries were folded with miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream. The mixture was chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld and marshmallows to soften. Served in cut glass bowls, the pastel colors seemed appropriately festive. Children especially loved ambrosia, often requesting second helpings despite protests about ruining their appetite. The dish required no cooking, making it perfect for busy kitchens where oven space was precious. Some families added pecans or used cottage cheese, each variation reflecting regional preferences. Ambrosia has largely disappeared from Christmas tables, dismissed as too sweet and artificial, but for decades it was a beloved tradition that children anticipated all year. 100 meals, and not a single one needed a recipe book or a trip to a specialty store. They came from kitchens where the budget was tight, the pantry was thin, and giving up was never on the table. If any of these dinners brought back a memory of someone you loved, share this video with the person who would remember it too. And if you want more of these meals before they disappear for good, hit subscribe so you never miss one.